Welcome to the Housing and Planning Commission's May 16th, 2022 special joint meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with Housing Commission and Planning Commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I will call the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. I would like to introduce the Housing Commission, Planning Commission, and staff members present. From the Housing Commission, we have myself, Lauren Bigelow, Jacqueline Campos, Heather Leach, Nevada Merriman, John Pimentel, and Adriana Walker. From the Planning Commission, we have Andrew Barnes, Lindan Doe, Chair DeCardi, Cynthia Harris, Henry Riggs, do I see you? There you are, hi. And we have Michelle Tate and David Thomas. From city staff, we have Assistant Community Development Director Deanna Chow, Acting Housing Manager Mike Noche, Acting Principal Planner Tom Smith, and Senior Planner Calvin Chan. Also present are staff from M Group, the city's Housing Element Update Consultant, Jeff Bradley, and Asher Cohn. All right, Calvin, would you please provide instructions to the commissions and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Thank you, Chair Bigelow and members of the Housing and Planning Commission. Welcome everyone to the May 16th special joint meeting of the Housing and Planning Commissions. At this time, we ask that members of the commissions to please remain on screen for the duration of the meeting. You will be able to control your own webcams and as well as microphones. Staff will engage cameras and microphones to make presentations and will respond to members of the public and the commissions. For members of the public who are in attendance this evening and wish to provide public comment, after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, please engage the raised hand feature on your Zoom platform, or if you're joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise hand to speak. I'll then have the ability to open your microphone and you can provide your public comment to the Planning and the Housing Commissions. That concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. Deanna and Mike, do we have any reports or announcements this evening?
Thank you, Chair Bigelow. Just probably I'll do a joint reminder that we have two upcoming, so thank you all for being here this evening for a special meeting, a joint meeting for the housing element. We will have our regular meetings for the Planning Commission resume on May 23rd, and then a regular Housing Commission meeting on June 1st. I do believe there will be a start time that's later, but Mike can confirm that, or we can confirm that as we near the agenda packet as well. And that concludes our comments.
No additional updates on my end either. I'll return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Much appreciated, both of you. Under regular business, the Housing Commission and Planning Commission receive informational presentations in addition to considering policy matters and administrative actions. So under agenda item D1, Asher Cohn of the M Group will now provide a presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Bigelow. I'm going to share my screen now. Great, and everyone can see that?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you so much. Good evening, commissioners, members of the public. My name is Asher Cohn. I'm a planner with M Group. We've been working on the housing element with the city. I'm going to walk you through this presentation on the public review draft housing element. First, I'm going to discuss the outreach that went into the document. Then I'll discuss the structure and content of the housing element before reviewing the site inventory. I'll then turn the presentation over to my colleague, Brittany Bendix, who will go through an overview of the goals, policies, and programs before concluding by discussing the timeline to adoption for the housing element. So to begin, the outreach. We've done considerable outreach throughout this process, and you can read more about it on the website at the bottom of the slide, menlopark.org/housing element. We've had council meetings, housing commission and planning commission meetings, a citywide survey, CEOC meetings, and meetings with the community. We've sent out citywide mailers, focus groups, put out social media messages, and held pop-up meetings in the community. Finally, we've had 2 project galleries that were available in Menlo Park's libraries. We got a lot of really valuable information from all of this. Some of the highlights that we heard a lot of concerns over displacement and how to ensure that affordable housing would actually be built. We heard that housing should include support services for special needs populations, and there should be a wide range of housing options in Menlo Park, from accessory dwelling units or ADUs to higher density housing near transit. We set up the housing element in a manner we hope is easy to follow. There are 9 chapters in the document, plus the appendices. These chapters are the introduction, the 5th cycle housing element review, housing conditions and trends, affirmatively furthering fair housing, actual and potential constraints to housing, energy, the site inventory analysis, goals, policies, and programs, and definitions of key terms. The next few slides will hit on some of the highlights of these chapters. For the 5th cycle review, we evaluate the accomplishments of the previous cycle, which goes from 2015 to 2023. We identified policy and program changes from the 5th cycle for the 6th cycle, which goes from 2023 to 2031. The housing conditions and trends looks at the housing data and forecasts. For example, we've seen housing values grow substantially in the city, even compared to the county and the region, which has made purchasing a home out of reach for many working and middle-class families. And from a geographic perspective, the state classifies census tracts throughout the state as high, moderate, or low resource areas, and notes that low resource areas where there's often high segregation and poverty. These terms are defined by the state treasurer, and they're broadly understood by the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, as ways to determine where access to health, educational opportunities, and economic mobility is located. In Menlo Park specifically, the white population is disproportionately located in high resource areas, and the Hispanic population is disproportionately in the low resource areas. Turning our attention to the site's inventory, we can see what this all looks like from a numbers perspective. So in orange at the top is the regional housing needs allocation for Menlo Park. HCD recommends a 30% buffer, and we put this buffer number just below in green. We can take credit for pipeline projects, that is housing developments that are underway, and ADU projections to assess how many units we need. As you can see, there are enough units in the pipeline projects and ADU projections to take care of our above moderate unit allocation, as well as a substantial part of our affordable unit allocation. So we're left with needing to find sites to accommodate 1,469 units. The vast majority of the pipeline projects in Menlo Park are located in Council District 1 on the north side of US 101, this kind of emerald green color. So our first focus was distributing sites through Council Districts 2 through 5. And as you might recall from a few slides ago, the highest resources in Menlo Park are south of US 101. This means we're putting the bulk of our 1,469 affordable units in high resource areas, which is a huge plus from HCD's perspective. HCD published a list of its criteria for sites that can be developed with housing for lower income households. And this includes parcels that are 1/2 to 10 acres in size, parcels located near resources, and areas with available infrastructure such as utilities. So we did a fair housing map screening to look at proximity to resources specifically. Here you can see proximity we defined as 15-minute walking distances to grocery stores. And next is transit, which includes Samtrans buses in blue and Caltrain in red. And we also looked at 15-minute walking distance to parks and open space, as well as major employers. This is using 2020 data and commercial areas. We looked at proximity to healthcare, and here I should note the VA hospital, which is the topmost heart That's a particular asset for Menlo Park because it particularly serves veterans. And finally, schools. So we assessed all the parcels in the city based on how many amenities they were near. As we narrowed down the list of sites, we emphasized identifying sites that were near multiple resources. For each of the 73 sites, we developed site sheets with important information on them, including this AFH score, which shows how many of these amenities that a site was near. You can see that circled in yellow here. The maximum AFH score is 7. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Brittany now, and she'll be discussing housing goals and policies.
Great, thanks Asher. I'll take it from here. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Brittany Bendix, principal planner with M Group, and I will be walking you through the housing elements, housing goals, and policies. Next slide. First, we'll start with an overview of how the goals and policies are laid out. To begin, there are housing goals, which are overarching housing objectives that Menlo Park will strive for. These goals are supported by policies, which are approaches that move the city towards its goals. And finally, there are programs, which are the concrete steps that enact a policy to accomplish the goals. The overarching intent of the housing element is to create a balanced community with a focus on affordability that will forward social justice. The existing 5th cycle housing element that spanned from 2015 to 2023 has 4 goals. The 6th cycle housing element that has been the focus of our current efforts is proposing 7 goals. The policies that underlie the goals for the 6th cycle housing element have come from a variety of sources. These include community outreach findings, issues identified in fair housing analysis, site-specific programs, policies to reduce the constraints to housing, and the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG's, resilient housing policies. To give an overview of these goals and what they entail, we have them on 2 slides. Once we go through the overview, we'll then cover the policies associated with each goal. So goal 1 is implementation responsibilities with focus on building local government institutional capacity and monitoring accomplishments. Goal H2 is existing housing neighborhoods, which focuses on equitably maintaining, protecting, and enhancing existing housing and neighborhoods while supporting schools, services, and infrastructure. Goal H3 is specialized housing needs, and this focuses on providing housing for special needs populations and coordinating with support services. Moving along, Goal H4 is affordable housing, supporting the development of a diversity of housing types for all income levels, particularly those households at extremely low, very low, and low. Goal H5 is equity, ensuring equitable access to housing. Goal H6 is sustainable housing, focusing on policies that implement sustainable and resilient housing development practices. And goal H7 is design of housing. This goal ensures that new housing is well designed and addresses the housing needs of the city. So now we'll look at each of the 7 goals more deeply to illustrate how the policies support the intentions behind those goals. Goal H1 is largely carried over from the current housing element, and so the policies reflect efforts that are already ongoing, but in some places improved by current best practices. These policies include direction to coordinate with regional and interjurisdictional efforts, utilize and advertise BMR funds, augment local funding, increase organizational effectiveness, including evaluating staff capacity, coordinate with nonprofits on housing, and monitor the housing element. Goal H2, existing housing and neighborhoods, is also largely carried over from the 5th cycle housing element. These policies are meant to adopt an ordinance for at-risk units, provide housing rehabilitation outreach and funding, adopt an ADU amnesty ordinance, and develop an anti-displacement strategy with the community. Goal H3, specialized housing needs, has both policies carried over from the 5th cycle housing element and includes new policies. These policies are intended to encourage linking supportive services to housing, incentivize accessible and special needs housing, publicize rental assistance programs, allow low barrier navigation centers in residential mixed-use areas, and to participate in regional collaboration to address homelessness. Goal H4, affordable housing, similarly has both carryover policies and new policies. Together, these policies are intended to rezone for higher housing densities near downtown, allow for ministerial review of 100% affordable housing, enable modifications to the affordable housing overlay, enable conversion of commercial properties to mixed-use properties, modify the below market rate inclusionary requirement and in lieu fees, modify parking requirements, and to facilitate ADUs. Goal H5 has a focus towards equity, and this includes both carryover policies and new policies with the intent to ensure equal housing opportunities, require community participation in planning, identify opportunities for homeownership, provide multilingual information on housing programs, and provide tenant support and protection programs, including a fair chance ordinance, which is a policy that doesn't allow landlords to screen out individuals with criminal histories for rental applications. Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Richmond all have some sort of fair chance law, as do several cities outside the Bay Area. Goal 6, sustainable housing, is another with a mix of carryover and new policies. Policies here include encouraging renewable energy and conservation, implementing walking and biking improvements, and promoting resilient design and air conditioning alternatives. And finally, Goal H7, design of housing, includes both carryover and new policies that focus on development of residential design standards and establishing objective design standards for SB 9 projects. So with all that said, we will wrap up our presentation with a quick snapshot of where we are in the process and what's next. The 30-day public review period began last Wednesday on May 11th. This is the public's first opportunity to review and comment on a full draft of the housing element. In June, we will then send the draft housing element onto HCD for an initial and preliminary review. At the same time, the draft subsequent environmental impact report, or SEIR, will be circulated. Between July and September, we will see another few key milestones. The final SEIR will be published. We will receive comments back from HCD on the draft housing element, and the safety and environmental justice elements will be ready for public review. Although note that these latter two elements do not require a review period by the state body like HCD. In October through November, the SEIR is on track to be certified, and the housing element will ultimately be submitted to HCD for their final approval. Then in December, the zoning ordinance changes will go in front of council and the HCD will approve the housing element. However, note that these dates are all tentative and subject to modification. So as was previously mentioned, we are currently in a public review period for the draft housing element, and the review draft is up on the city's website where it can be accessed. The website again is menlopark.org/housing element, and that's one word. At this website, there's also an online web form to provide comments. It will be up until June 10th, 2022. In addition to submitting comments online, there will also be a city council study session scheduled in late May or early June that will provide for another venue for public comments. This concludes our presentation for the evening. So thank you very much for listening. And at this time, we will turn it over to the commissioners for questions.
Thank you so much, Brittany, Asher, and M Group for your presentation and all the hard work that went into the draft housing element at this time. I'm going to go first to the Housing Commission to see if they have any clarifying questions. Then I'll go to the Planning Commission and then to public comment. So are there any clarifying questions from the Housing Commission? Commissioner Leach.
I echo the, I really appreciate all the work that went into this. It's a tremendous resource, and it was very long. And I appreciate the detail. And I'm glad that I was temporarily between projects, so I could spend some time on that. I had some questions about, and again, if this is not what we're talking about right now, feel free to let me know. One of the things I was excited to see that there was a plan to develop some of the parking lots downtown. I know we talked about that. And I wanted to ask about plans to augment that parking. And there was mention of modifying the parking requirements for the buildings downtown. Just anticipating something that is going to be something that a lot of people are going to be wondering about. Is there a plan to build a parking structure? Is there a plan to address the parking going away? I think it's fantastic. I think it's definitely something that needs to happen. And I think it's going to be a firestorm getting this passed. Again, if this is not the appropriate place for it, feel free to let me know.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Leach, for that question. Staff, do you want to take that, or M Group? Which would you guys prefer?
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chair
Chair.
Bigelow. This is Jeff Riley with M Group. I was going to ask Assistant Director Deanna Chow if she wanted to field that one.
Yes, thanks. Thank you. So Chair Bigelow, we have a number of our project team here from both city staff as well as M Group, as well as our city attorney, Nira Doherty, online with us this evening. So we'll be sharing questions and responding. So you'll see a number of our faces here this evening, but thank you for the question, Commissioner Leach. So yes, as part of our housing opportunity sites, you did see a number of these city-owned parking lots as potential sites for additional housing, hopefully particularly affordable housing. One of the programs in our housing element does identify putting out an RFP to identify what some of those best uses might be. So there's not a plan of how much housing, is it a mix of housing and retail? Is it a mix of different types of land uses? That I think would be part of the RFP that would go out, and it would seek to include parking as part of that. So whether it's on that particular site or it's on another site that we keep for parking and we put a parking garage there, I think there's variations and combinations that can be explored. So there is no one particular type of development that is being sought at this point. It's understanding that we hope to promote the addition of housing on one or more of our city-owned parking lots downtown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Merriman.
Hi, thank you. I have a couple quick questions. For the goal that's related to interjurisdictional and regional efforts, can staff or the M Group share a little bit about what they had in mind? Maybe, are there any such efforts that our city council or staff are currently participating in, and what might be some targets for participation?
I think I might be able to take this one, Jeff and Deanna. That's okay. So this is it's a policy that was included in the fifth cycle of the current housing element as well, and it involves policies like seeking funding for affordable housing, working with the county to find solutions for special needs housing, people dealing with homelessness, things like that. So it's really about a lot of this sort of like cross-jurisdictional collaboration in order to work with special needs groups or finding funding sources. And a lot of it is ongoing right now.
Okay, if maybe as a follow-up to this meeting, you could provide a list of what is being accessed. There is a lot of county and regional policy leadership occurring right now. And it would be great to have staff track and have a real strategy on the council level for our participation in that effort. I'm happy to talk more about that in comments. But another question I had was for goal H4, the focus on extremely low income housing, or it's mentioned as one of the different types of housing to provide housing across the spectrum. Are we tracking that?
Deanna, I think that's a might be a good question for Mike Nochi regarding the annual progress reports and the tracking of the housing units by income category.
Thank you, Acting Housing Manager Mike Noche. Commissioner Merriman, please correct me if I'm wrong. It was the APR. Was it more than the APR that you were inquiring about as far as tracking of housing units coming online, or is that what we were?
Well, those who know me
potentially pointing
already
to?
probably know that the existing annual report does not ask for a tracking of extremely low income, although I do believe it's information that staff has and might strengthen the report to include, given that it's the way the goal is written is that we're supposed to be looking at that whole spectrum, but the report doesn't give that information. So my question was if that could be provided. It's basically, I think, my understanding, it's the VLI number, but would be broken into two groups. That has some amount of those units are very low income and some of those are targeted for extremely low income. But I think that would be helpful. Thank you. That's it for now.
And I'll just confirm that that is something staff does track. So I know we have that metric. Thank you for the clarification, Commissioner Merriman.
Thank you, Commissioner Merriman. If I just may add, I believe we do have the number of the VLI in our document. I will try to pull that out and share that with you. I know, as you mentioned, it is not a separate, it's very low and moderate, but I believe we.
Yeah, I see the very low as 233 in the last cycle and 962 needed for this current cycle. But my questions are, since it's not a new policy of the 233, I think you probably have the information to take that 233 and break that down as to were all of them very low income or were some percentage of them extremely low income. So that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, thank you all. I don't have any questions at this time. So, oh, wait, I have another housing commissioner that has questions, and then I will come to you in just a second, Michelle. Commissioner Pimentel. Nope, I can't hear you at all, but I can read lips. So I'm hoping you can unmute.
I just wanted to follow up on the question that was raised earlier about the downtown parking lot housing development. I didn't see it anywhere specifically called out, the process in the housing element description. I may have missed it, but I did hear staff say that it sounded like there was an expectation there would be some sort of an RFP process. I want to make sure I heard that right, and if so, can we discuss that timing, or in the next iteration of this housing element, can we include a discussion of that process and the timing therefore?
Chair Bigelow, may I respond to that? Thanks. So yes, Commissioner, we have it in program H4G. So it's considered city-owned parking lots. That is to, again, to promote the affordable housing and to develop a request for proposals to seek explore development options, including affordable housing and consideration for extremely low income housing, to, I think, Commissioner Merriman's point. And right now our time frame for that is by the end of 2025.
Oh, so the process would be started by the end of 2025 or completed?
So it would be completed by the end of 20. The
Great.
way that it's structured now is 20.
Thank you very much. I'll take a closer look at that section. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Housing Commissioner, just to add in, it's on PDF page 329 of the giant 700-page thing, just so you don't have to control F to it. That's where it'd be located.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. And agreed, love the attention paid to our 9 parking lots, but that's a comment, not a question. So I will, one quick question, Dana. Acutely low isn't covered in RENA yet, correct?
I don't believe so, but maybe Mr. Bradley has more specifics.
Yes, as the previous discussion touched on, the idea that very low income by definition includes extremely low income. And then the new category that was recently created goes even lower to 0 to 15% of area median income for different household sizes. And that, as you noted, is known as acutely low income. And jurisdictions are required to plan for acutely low income households and extremely low income households, but those income categories in and of themselves have not been directly included in the RENA allocations itself. So everything you see published from ABAG and from HCD and from the city around the RENA targets, you'll see very low income, which covers from 0 to 50%. But when you see that, just keep in mind that by definition, it also includes those other 2 income categories that we required to have policies and programs on, but it's not treated the same way in the raw RENA number focused production requirements.
Got it. I appreciate that. So it's a sum, a lump sum, essentially. Perfect. All right. So with that, last call for Housing Commission clarifying questions. Hearing none, I will move to clarifying questions from the Planning Commission. Commissioner Tate, thank you so much for being patient with me. I would love to hear your question. And if it takes a second to unmute, that's okay, because it has to happen at least once in a Zoom meeting.
Sorry about that. I did say earlier, but I don't think you were on yet. My little track thing is temperamental today. I actually just wanted to kind of comment on Commissioner Merriman's question about other jurisdictions and the region and what collaboration, what was an idea or a thought for collaboration at this point. And I guess I'm curious to know whether or not other jurisdictions have actually been polled or consulted or conversations with them, because I do know that San Bruno actually is proposing something to join other cities in San Mateo County to share housing staff to support housing trusts, inclusionary zoning, and 100% of affordable housing and other projects. So just wondering if there's been any conversations or anything between Menlo Park and even San Bruno or other jurisdictions at this point.
And go ahead and respond to that particular question. So thank you, Commissioner Tate.
Yeah, and
So,
part of my question is really because I feel like we're all working on the same, we're all working on housing element. So and we understand this is a regional problem, right? But one city can't absorb everything. And just really, what is everyone doing to try to work together with this?
Yes, no, yes, it is. Housing is definitely on everyone's mind, especially as we are all embarking on, or not embarking, we are all in the thick of our housing elements. And so, yes, there has been conversation amongst the jurisdictions, that particularly the smaller jurisdictions, where could there be a planning staff person that could be shared amongst the different jurisdictions to help support and supplement the work that they're doing. So that has been a conversation that has been occurring within the 21 Elements group. So that is all of the 20 jurisdictions plus the county. And so that has been conversations there. I will say for Menlo Park, one thing that we are planning as part of our upcoming budget cycle is the addition of 1 additional management analyst FTE, so full-time equivalent, to help support our housing team. So I think we're focusing our efforts in that arena by bringing on potentially another staff person in the city.
Okay. So I remember years back, the Housing Commission actually petitioned for additional staff in the housing department, and we were successful. Mike, that might be partly how you got here. I'm not sure, but so I'm just wondering whether or not having 1 additional person is really going to be enough to help monitor all this process and to really give us a robust department to get behind everything that's happening and really to make a difference. So I really hope the city thinks hard and long about, well, maybe not too long, but about either additional staff or doing some sort of a collaboration if there is a way to share resources, to have people that are just, that is their only focus, is to manage this process. And that's all I have for now. Hopefully I'll be able to unmute myself as we go on. Thank you.
I have faith in you, and thank you for your questions. Okay, so fellow commissioners from the Planning Commission, do we have any other clarifying questions? You could use your raise hand button. There are quite a few of us, and I can track that pretty easily. All right, going once, twice. Okay, hearing none. Then I think that last call, anybody from either commission have any last clarifying questions before we go to public comment? Commissioner Tate.
Yeah, so since no one else has anything, so I was just wondering something else, and that is whether or not taking another look at the Civic Center is an option. For one, that was years ago. We definitely have seen changes in the region since that was evaluated. And if I'm not mistaken, as I was reading through here, the key takeaways for the 21 elements were, let's see, affordable housing is a top concern. You know, there's several here, and let's see, equity is on people's mind, more housing is needed. I mean, we're, you know, everything is, and the price of housing is a major concern. So there's like all these and diversity, and so I just feel like everything that is a common thread, and that's on the top of everyone's mind right now, since affordable housing is definitely on the top of many people in Menlo Park's mind now, is whether or not we can take another look at developing housing in Civic Center. For one, we do have a different council, and again, the climate in the community is definitely different than it was when this was evaluated years ago. And that is a question, that's not a statement.
Understood. And I'm not sure if that's M Group or city staff, so I will leave it to you two to decide.
I could take a stab at that, Chair Bigelow. I know during this process that's been going on since May of last year, with a lot of focus on the site selection, obviously always draws a lot of interest. There was discussion around, the idea came up at some of the community meetings, and questions were asked about including the Civic Center site. And at the time, as we were checking in with the city council through that process, we carried that input forward, and we didn't get any interest in pursuing that at that time.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Commissioner Tate, does that answer your question?
Sorry, I muted myself prematurely before the question was answered. It does answer my question, and hopefully council will take another look at this, and hopefully, well, public comment is very important. So hopefully the community members, as well as folks on the commission, these two commissions can try to rally around that. And even if it's shot down again, I believe it is something that needs to be explored. And especially since the specific plan is something that we know needs to be looked out, we might as well look at this also at this point when we're doing site selection. Or I should say assessing sites, potential sites. Thank you so much for answering that question.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. One more last call. Okay. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Calvin Chan, who will direct public comment.
Thank you, Chair Bigelow. For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, please engage the raise hand feature at this time. We will then have the ability to open your microphone and you can provide your public comment to the Housing and Planning Commissions. For members of the public joining us this evening by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand to provide public comment. Please go ahead and raise your virtual hands at this time. Chair Bigelow, looks like we have about 3 hands raised. We may get more hands raised during our public comment period, but I'll begin by calling speakers at this time.
Wonderful. And in order to ensure that everyone who wishes to speak will have the opportunity to be heard, we'll adjust the time limit for comments depending on the number of speakers with raised hands. Right now, it's 4. So traditional thought is between 1 to 15 speakers, we allow 3 minutes. If we have significantly more than that, we can readdress things. All right, so it looks like we've got 4 comments at this time. So we allow for 3 minutes each, I guess.
Thank you, Chair Bigelow. I'll call on the first speaker, which will be Naomi Goodman, followed by Karen Grove. Naomi, you may provide your comment to the commissions at this time.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Okay,
yes,
good.
Thank you.
Yeah, commissioners, in addition to updating the housing element to promote more construction, Menlo Park is also embarking on an update to the safety plan. I have a suggestion of a way that these 2 efforts could be used to promote construction of additional housing in a way that is less disruptive to the city residents than filling in parking lots and displacing small businesses. Throughout Menlo Park, there are many apartment complexes that appear to be soft story construction. That is, they are constructed with residential units over carports or other joint parking. In a major earthquake, some of these buildings could collapse, leading to potential loss of life and a significant decrease in housing stock. I conducted an informal survey to identify multi-unit residential buildings of this type in Menlo Park. My survey identified approximately 240 parcels containing 1 or more potentially soft story buildings. I did not count units, but based on the typical building size, these likely represent more than 1,000 housing units. The greatest number of these buildings are located in the following areas: Coleman Avenue, Linfield, downtown, both north and south of Santa Cruz Avenue, Mills Tract, San Antonio Street, and Bellhaven. I would like you to consider whether implementing a soft story ordinance requiring structural retrofits, such as those in Palo Alto and Berkeley, coupled with financial incentives to property owners to replace them with taller apartment buildings with more units, would increase public safety and the housing stock. Addition of a soft story building replacement as a goal to program H2C, assist in implementing housing rehabilitation programs, would support this approach. However, it would need to be applied citywide. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Apologies, I had a little bit of a technical issue. We'll now call on our next speaker, Karen Grove.
Thank you. Good evening. So I have a lot to say, so I'm just going to give the headline first and see what I can get to in detail. But the big picture comment is that there's some really good ideas and really great intentions in this. I'm focusing on the programs and policies, but I think in a lot of cases we could use clarity and robustness and metrics in order to be successful. I love the conversation about monitoring ALI, ELI, and BLI income homes separately. And I think in addition to monitoring progress, we also need to be clear about which programs achieve which types of housing, because not all programs achieve extremely low or acutely low income housing, but they may achieve very low income housing. I love the idea of housing at the Civic Center because we have buildings there and we could just add housing on the top and it would be a beautiful vision in my opinion. So in terms of monitoring progress, another thing I'd like to see us monitor is the number of accessible units available to people who live with disabilities. And when a milestone is set for 5 years after housing element adoption, I'd love us to adopt some interim milestones that will ensure that we are successful at reaching that long-term 5-year milestone. It's really important that we consider city-owned land for deeply affordable housing because we control that land. So to that extent, to that point, I really support the parking lots and, like I've said, also the Civic Center. I love the idea of ministerial review of 100% affordable housing, but as written right now, it's sort of contingent on adopting universal design standards for residential homes in every single zoning category that we have, and they are numerous. So I would like there to be sort of a sunset on that contingency so that if we don't adopt universal design standards within 3 years, we still adopt ministerial review of 100% affordable housing, maybe with some default design standards. Tenant protections, I think, need to be more robust and also achieved in a shorter time frame because we've already, I mean, the best time to do our tenant protections was 10 years ago. So the next best time is now. And there's an indication of doing some community outreach, which I'm loath to do more community outreach to impacted communities because I feel like they've already told us what they need. And our city council has said no. They need rent control or rent caps. They need just cause for eviction. And I'm very glad that we've done funding for emergency rent and mortgage assistance, and I hope that we continue that. I'm out of time and I didn't get to BMR updates, but those are important too. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next speaker will be Ken Kirschner, followed by Adina Levin. Ken, you can provide your comment to the commissions at this time.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name's Ken Kirschner. I'm a resident of Menlo Park starting in 1991 on Willow Road and the last 6 years on College Avenue. I have two questions. One is, when is the first time the ABAG and HCD will see the draft housing element plan? And the second question is, how will the impact on the transportation master plan be incorporated? It's generally well understood that land use, housing, transportation need to be planned together to create a safer, more walkable community. And so I'm advocating for the Complete Streets Commission to be formally included in this timeline. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next speaker is Adina Levin, followed by the username S. Arrington. Adina, you can provide your comment at this time.
Good evening, planning commissioners, staff, and consultants. Adina Levin, Menlo Park resident. And I have a few comments. First of all, I wanted to thank Commissioner Kate for the mention of the civic center location. That is very, centrally located and with access to a lot of transportation and services. And so it also encourage looking at that. And also in terms of the, and that also relates to another question that I have, or concern that I have, is with regard to the sites in the site inventory where there was a housing element site tour, and for some of the sites there wasn't evidence that that site would be made available for development of affordable housing, and some evidence in terms of the cost of the land based on and those properties based on comparables, that it would be extremely expensive and therefore extremely difficult and possibly unlikely to develop as affordable housing as those sites are mentioned. And so I think that having a city-owned land that is extremely centrally located, that would be a strong addition to this housing element. I wanted to make a couple of comments about the transportation items in the policies. One is, I'm glad to see the multimodal item, but it is pretty general, and there's a number of other cities in our region that have much more specific and robust transportation policies, and so I think it should be more specific. There's a couple of items in terms of multimodal transportation in general, and then in particular north of 101, which is great to see. It's great to see the specifics on the north of 101 to move forward and have specific goals in the capital improvement plan. The more general item, it said, I think it's several years in the future, and that was puzzling to me because we do have a transportation master plan. And so I think starting by setting goals to build out the transportation master plan is good. Wanted to echo what Ms. Grove said about tenant protections and also funding for BMR housing with the commercial linkage fee and any other funding. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Before I call on the last speaker, I'd like to do a last call for public comment. For members of the public that would like to provide public comment to the Planning Commission and Housing Commission, please engage the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining us by phone this evening, please press *9. The next speaker will be S. Arrington, followed by Pam Jones.
Hi, I'm assuming you can hear me. My name is Susan Arrington, and I can't talk the talk that all the others said. I'm a teacher who lives in Menlo Park, and I just want to share some of my ideas. And I hope that you will just take that and hear what I'm actually saying. I believe in affordable housing completely, 100%. I also believe in a sense of community. So if you're going to do affordable housing, and yes, I am going to talk about Site 38 in Menlo Park, make it a home for the people. Don't make it 270 units that is a jail for people to feel empowered. That's not fair. That's a disservice. You need to make it a sense of community, a home, 47, 50 units, and have a front yard, have a backyard, have a sense that they are part of something bigger than just I get a place to live, but let them grow. I have a lot of students, and I work in Menlo Park, that live on Coleman Avenue. I have a family that has 13 people in a 2-bedroom apartment with no sense of community. They don't have a outdoor area. They don't have anything to keep their own, to say that this is where they live. And I think that transportation is huge. A way in and out of the community is huge. I think that if, like, let's say Site 38 gets 50 units and there's homes and yards and everything like that, make a separate entrance. The kids are in Ravenswood. They've got to go over that walking bridge. That's not fair that they have to be in their car going all the way over in a car. It's just, it doesn't make sense to me. And I've been teaching for 30 years, and a lot of our kids come from East Palo Alto, and I will do anything for them. And this is not the right makeup for what is going on. And I think that we're making a grave mistake because we're not thinking this through for the soul of a person. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next speaker will be Pam Jones, followed by Mihal.
This is Pam Jones, a longtime resident of Menlo Park in the Bellhaven neighborhood. Thank you, planning commissioners, housing commissioners, for the work that you do, and for having this joint meeting. I do fully support housing on the main campus where the library is. It seems to me this would be an opportune time to have the library rebuilt. And I also want to see the affordable to be at least 20%, if not more. What we have now is never going to get us to where we need to be. Because there's no real intention of building low-income housing unless it can be put over here in Bellhaven, which is pretty much what people tend to say. Housing on all parking lots, put the parking spaces below the apartments above, use the highest density that we can manage. That, to me, that would revitalize the downtown. And so it would serve two purposes. All of the resources there are walkable. Medical, food, pharmacy, and the train is all walkable from downtown. And I believe that you've got a joint proposal from two of the commissioners, one a housing commissioner and the other a planning commissioner. So part of the work's already been done. My greatest concern is that the housing will not be buildable anywhere else in the city of Menlo Park because there's such great resistance and particularly fear that the low income housing, those people are going to be living in my community. And I can see that the way that could possibly play out is that somehow all of the units will be built on the remaining lots that are upzoned in M2. And as I've said before, I'll say it again. If that does happen, it means we would be putting all the low income, which is what we're required to build, in the same place and in the same buildings. So we need to be really careful about how we move forward. We need to be really careful about the messaging. And we constantly need to help people to understand there's a process before anything is built anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The next speaker is Mihao, followed by username Fries03.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mihal Bortnik. I'm a resident of Menlo Park, Allied Arts. And first, I just want to share housing element draft is an overwhelming document for me. I think most 700-page documents are overwhelming, but this one in particular. So congratulations to everybody who can handle it. And thank you to the people who put it together. It's quite a feat. And just wanted to share, when I get overwhelmed like that, I tend to simplify and try to figure out where's the essence of the thing. And as I understand, at the core of it is trying to figure out how we're going to get to that 1,500 affordable units number. What's actually going to get us to seeing those units built in the next 80 years. And as I understand, the vast majority of that, almost 80%, is centered around 100% affordable developments, as opposed to the inclusive 15% BMR units. And so just looking at the sweet spot of what it takes to build a 100% affordable housing site, they tend to be around an acre and around 80 to 100 units. And so doing the math, they're basically needing 12 developments, 12 sites, 12 developments that will actually happen over the next 80 years. Over the last 7 years, I think we've only had one, and none in the areas that we are trying to place them because of FFFH. And so just my mind goes to okay, so which are the 12 sites? There are, I think, three things that are needed. We need the property owner to want to do this. We need a developer who will be willing to do this, and we need the financing to make that possible, at least. And so I'm wondering how many of the sites that we have already have all three, or even have a chance of having all three ever. And if we don't already have those 12 sites identified, what makes us think that they'll just materialize on their own just because we wait a few years? And so my ask for everyone here, especially commissioners, staff, and consultants, is to do what you can to test the assumptions about what will actually happen, and try to make contact with reality as quickly as possible and see how many of those sites are going to have the landowner interest, developer interest, and source of financing to actually bring the affordable units that we need in our community to reality. And thank you again for all your hard work.
Thank you for your comment. I'll now call the last public speaker with a screen name of Fries03.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
This is Kurt Conroy. I don't know how I get identified as Fries Zero anything. I'm a Menlo Park resident since 1985 and was a member of the commission from 2020 and 21. I just wanted to bring the commissioner's attention to the fact that the California Department of Finance reported recently that the Bay Area and the state of California have both lost population in the last 2 years. Excuse me. The Bay Area's population went down by 0.7%, which was more than twice the decline of the state's 0.3%. And that, in fact, 42.9 of the state's decline happened in the Bay Area. You know, the presumption of the plan and the element is all on how the Bay Area is going to keep growing and growing, growing in population. And maybe that's just not a correct assumption. Also want to bring attention to the fact the Wall Street Journal last week on the 14th reported on their front page that the large tech companies are, quote, hitting pause on hiring. And they reported that Facebook, Meta Platforms, announced the previous week that they would, quote, sharply slow its hiring. So I'm a landlord of apartments here in Menlo Park, and I know that the vacancy rate has been quite high for the last 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic and remains so. And that the shortage of housing may not be as dire as it might appear given the exodus of people from the state and from the Bay Area in particular. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And with that, we have gone through all the interested speakers for our public comment period. Chair Bigelow, I return the meeting back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to our public commenters and attendees. We may now begin with any initial comments and discussion. Staff has suggested that we organize our discussion around the chapters of the draft housing element. If that would be all right, let's begin with any discussion on chapters 1 through 6. So that would be the introduction through the energy chapter. First, I'll just follow the same platform and go Housing Commission, Planning Commission, if that's okay with you guys. So Housing Commission members, would anyone like to provide any comments on chapters 1 through 6? Please use your raise hand button now. All right, first up, we have Commissioner Leach.
I had a comment on something in chapter 2 about the unhoused, the partnerships for the unhoused. And there was a comment about removing the big encampment at Ravenswood. And it's such a tricky subject. It's so complicated, the unhoused issue. So I'm happy to see that there's something in place to address it. We don't have a tremendous problem here in Menlo Park, but it's definitely gotten a lot worse. So I was happy to see, and I don't really have a clarifying question. I just want to, I'm happy to see that it's addressed in there, and I think it's a really complicated issue. And I have something that when I read that, I really made me want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into what happened with the Ravenswood encampment. Like, what do we mean by, how are we addressing the needs of the people that are, as it all dovetails with what we're talking about with the extremely low income. So many people are just on the verge of homelessness. So I'm glad to see that there, and that's all I had to say.
Thank you for your thoughts, Commissioner Leach. All right, I will go Commissioner Merriman, see if anybody else from the Housing Commission has any comments, and then I will come to you in the Planning Commission, Commissioner Thomas. So Commissioner Merriman.
Hi, thank you. When it comes to the 5th cycle evaluation, I want to comment more on the characterization of the very low income homes, and also Well, it seems to me that we need to include a lot more information here because it's not just a technical term. We also in the Bay Area have had several years where the incomes, the area median incomes have jumped over 10% in a single year, and that's happened over and over and over again. So when I was looking at when we started off with the last cycle, it would have been in 2015. Very low income for a family of four would have been an income of 58,600. And now with the 2021 income limits, we're talking about 91,350. So I think it's really important for us to recognize that in today's dollars, we don't really account for in the annual reporting or in our policies families that earn below $90,000 a year. And that's the definition of very low is misleading in this way because of this trend that we've had over the just the exponential growth in that area. So I would love to see a little bit more context there, and certainly the description of the number of extremely low income homes that we have produced, which there has been a few. I know that there's at least 50 or so, maybe more, in the projects that my employer has worked on. And kind of in addition to that, with the definition of extremely low income, I want to add to the comment that there is legislation that's pending that seems to be somewhat, that has some support by Robert Rivas in the Assembly, and it is to track extremely low income units. So I think it's important to talk about that even though there was no goal assigned in this coming RENA at any time in any year, the report could be changed. And that is something that Assemblymember Rivas is part of the housing leadership subcommittee at the Assembly. So he is somebody with some standing when it comes to this. And there is a potential that will pass this year, if not this year, next year. So I would urge staff to look at that and anticipate it in the document and understand why here in Menlo Park, almost more than any other place in the state of California, it is so incredibly important. Because if we fail to really look at the numbers there, then we're leaving out families that are under 90,000, which is approximately, I think, 3 times the minimum wage. And so it's exaggerated because of how high the incomes are here. And it is more important that we look at that relevant than other places because of the way that is playing out. And I think just one more comment on the kind of evaluation of the last cycle is that it's great that we hit the number of homes that are required, but it is really eye-popping to me and has been for a while that how much we've overproduced at that above moderate level. So it's not just we've hit the numbers, but not in the right levels of affordability. And it's worth mentioning that although that's something that happens up and down the peninsula, that 700% of what is required for the category, that's not something that I've seen in kind of that high of a proportion anywhere else. And so I would love to see a little bit more in the document or in the staff presentation that really gives that some context and some urgency. Thank you.
Appreciate the comments, Commissioner Merriman. All right, do I have any other housing commissioners who would like to provide comment before I go to our planning commissioner friends? All right, hearing none, I will briefly say that I appreciate how thoroughly you guys went into the housing constraints and the fee structures. That was really helpful. And I also, the site inventory and analysis, how you qualified everything and broke it out into, so you could clearly see that the amount of units being produced is over 50% for affordable units. So we're at least supposedly putting money where our mouth is about making sure that we produce affordable units. And I have, yeah, I think that's it for me. So I will go now to Planning Commission, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I'd like to start off by thanking everyone who has been involved in putting together this document. I mean, it's just monumental in scope and really awesome. I have a couple questions on the first few sections. I was hoping to go just kind of one at a time, kind of just quickly get straight to the point. The first thing I wanted to hit is a comparison between Table 2.1 and Table 7.1. So I'll summarize these, assuming that it'd probably be difficult for most of the listeners to access these. So the first includes the 2015 through 2023 allocation by income level. And so is the allocation and how we have met this in the previous cycle. And what caught my eye there is that while we do well in like the very low income and have, way overproduction in the above moderate category, as Commissioner Merriman just highlighted, we haven't been doing so well in the low to moderate income categories. So for the low income category, we've hit 70% of the target. For the moderate category, we've only hit 15%. And I guess my question is, while more housing across the board is great, and it's great to hear everyone here chip in. I know there's been a lot of focus tonight on the lower ends of the spectrum, but I'm also kind of curious here why there's a gap in this part of the spectrum. And then Table 7.1 with the allocation for the next cycle. So both these categories are about 20% of the total. So I guess my questions are, one, do we have a good sense of why this is happening? And two, is there anything being done so that this doesn't happen again? Like, are these numbers for the next cycle where these categories are both about 20%? Does that take into the account like that we've struggled to reduce housing in these categories historically? So I guess that's my first question.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. That's a very, very astute question regarding the relative scarcity of moderate income homes that were produced during the current planning period under the existing housing element. Unfortunately, this is a pattern we see throughout the Bay Area. And I think it's best described as a mechanism in relation to the fact that, as we see here, above moderate or market rate housing is served very well by the private real estate development industry, exceeding the target by almost 800%, as a previous commissioner called out. So the private market, the majority of private developers are really seeking to serve those households that have enough income to pay fair market value for real estate provided either for rent or for sale. And then in reaction to that, almost a whole separate industry and discipline and group of professionals have banded around the idea of providing affordable housing, normally through a nonprofit organization that takes in multiple forms of financing to make their projects pencil out. Obviously, some for-profit developers also do affordable housing, especially when we're talking about mixing in some percentage of affordable housing with market rate developments. But what this sort of split sector has resulted in is this lack of moderate income housing, which also is sometimes known as the missing middle. And that can refer to both the price point. It's higher than the lower income category affordability levels, but it's lower than what pure market rate prices would be. So it's the missing middle from that perspective. And then it's also the missing middle from a density perspective that a lot of architects and urban designers have taken note of and started to address that. And so that's sort of that's the broad sort of society type thing that's happening around this. As a practical matter, a lot of cities will actually try to overproduce in the very low and the low, knowing that those lower units of housing can also carry forward into the higher income categories in terms of just complying with the state regulations. But of course, that doesn't address the practical reality that there's people that are at these moderate income categories that actually need housing that's suitable for their means. And so for the second part of your question of, well, what are we doing about this? What are we learning from the current problem and how are we applying that to the future? I'll turn to Asher and Brittany to point out where in our policy framework we encourage moderate income or missing middle housing. And maybe Asher, is there a policy you could pull up and share your screen so people could see it?
Yeah.
You're muted.
Hi, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. As Mr. Thomas noted, it's a 700-page document. So sometimes it can be tricky to get to the programs I want to get to on time. I know we're getting a substantial amount of units from the ADUs, which MTC kind of has proportion way of looking at them that gives us, lets us count a lot of ADUs as moderate income units. Sorry, this is taking a bit of time to get through. Some other programs, and sorry, I think the best way to do this is to share my screen.
I've got it on 8/18.
Great, thank you. Here. There's also things like the first time home buyer program can also help those 10 people with moderate incomes who are looking to buy their first home. There's ways to support these households to buy their first home in Menlo Park. And an additional source that kind of dovetails nicely with our, we discussed finding housing for very low income, lower income to have supportive services. And a lot of this involves having on-site staff who are tend to be people who fall into that moderate income grouping, and they having on-site units for them, for their families, allows us to both provide units for these families as well as, it's almost like a sort of live work sort of situation where they're able to care for people with very low incomes or like senior homes, things like this, while also being able to have homes themselves. So
we also see
Jeff.
moderate income units coming out as a result of the inclusionary housing ordinance that requires a percentage of market rate developments to set aside affordable units, and those are typically in the low and moderate income categories.
Okay, if I may take back the floor now. Thank you for answering my question. I guess one thing I'd point out is that housing stock at the higher end of the income spectrum over time will make its way down the spectrum. So any housing we get across the spectrum today will solve problems in the future. And I guess I just like to highlight that I'd love to see this piece of the distribution also addressed in line with the other pieces of the distribution, both at the low end, which receives a lot of attention as it should, and at the higher end, which has more private market incentive. Another quick comment. So in page 140, there is a sentence that was a tautology that regionally half of the people make more than 100% AMI. And if I understand correctly, AMI is a median. And so of course, half would make more than AMI. So that's on page 140. And I know on a 700-page document, that's kind of pedantic, but perhaps that sentence could be reworked.
If I can step in, it's actually a really interesting point that you bring up. So the AMI is based on San Mateo County, which is relatively more affluent than the region, which is the Bay Area. So I agree that the sentence could definitely be written better to make that clear, but it actually is pointing out that the AMI for Menlo Park is kind of dealing from a higher floor than the Bay Area as a whole. We could definitely work to make that more clear.
Okay, awesome. And then also, I think it says like roughly half is the term. So I guess that's like not a particularly informative statement. You might as well just use like a percentage there to make it precise. Let's see. Another point that's kind of outside of the core section. So on page 553, as a part of fair housing, we have the parks coverage. And one thing I'm like love about Menlo Park, and that I hear from a lot of the people in my network that are starting families. That's a really incredible resource. And I think we should, as the density in the area increases, there's only going to be more and more pressure on these parks. So they should really be a last resort for, more housing sites. So I'm really glad that we're able to currently, satisfy Reno without having to carve any space out of them. But yeah, I'd love, to point people to this document, because almost the entire city is within 15 minutes walking distance from parks. Another thing that came up is, I think somewhere in this document, there's some talk about how smaller units are more effective. So like 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom are more effective for some of the goals. But one thing that caught my eye is that over 15% of the Hispanic households in our district experience overcrowding. So they might be disproportionately impacted by having a lot of the housing stock for the lower income levels have fewer bedrooms. And this is also something I hear about from my network that admittedly has a lot of people starting families. That more housing towards that end of the distribution would be desired. And another thing that was in other parts of the document that I thought was interesting. So 13% of Menlo Park residents work in the city, 4% live in the city. And so I guess the question for staff is like, how are they taking that into account with housing? Is that something that is treated as acceptable, and we're trying to just work assuming that's going to be the status quo, or are we really trying to create housing so that less people need to commute outside the city? So I guess that's a question.
And really quickly, Commissioner Thomas, we are talking about housing conditions and trends. Is that the data points that you're referencing right now? Chapter 3? Okay.
Yes, chapter 3.
Perfect. I just want to make sure that we stick within the first 6 chapters just for right now. And then Jeff, I see you have an answer for us potentially.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to jump in and assert that one of the main goals, I believe, of the entire housing element process is to ensure that people who work in the community can actually afford to live in the community. So the answer would be yes.
Okay, awesome.
I just took your last question because it was the most, it got me the most excited about answering it. But thank you for all the other inputs also.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that concludes my questions on these sections of the doc. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of the very tiny detail that you were able to grab and bring to us. Do I have any other planning commissioners who have comments that they would like to share with the class? Okay. Right, Vice Chair, please.
Hi, I too would like to echo thanks for all the work that went into this. It is a pretty big document with a lot of details. And I do have a lot of big picture questions, but there's a couple things in the chapter 3 that I wanted to just make sure I had right. So I was looking at 3-6, jobs in the jurisdiction is 52,830, and 96% of people commute into Menlo Park. So does that, am I reading this right, that means that we have over 50,000 workers that commute to Menlo Park?
Ashley, you want to take that one?
I'm not sure who I'm asking that of.
I'm going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Answer that one.
No, I get it. Yeah, I was just getting to the document.
What table was that again?
Was on page 3-6. I
Okay.
said in my notes. I don't have it
Okay.
up with me right now.
Oh, that works.
So I would say that there's a lot of very confusing ways that workers are defined that make it really difficult to like make what should be very simple transitive declarations like the one you just made as straightforward as they should be. That's just kind of a frustrating thing with labor data. There we go. So
it's table 3.3 for anybody following along in the public.
I can, do you want me to share this page? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I guess I would say if it's jobs in jurisdiction, and that doesn't mean that people are coming into Menlo Park, what does that mean? And maybe you can help us understand what that means. And then how could we at least come up with some sort of estimate of how many people are commuting?
Yeah, so I believe the county has a vehicle miles traveled analysis. I don't know the exact date on it. It should be the past few years. That has a really good sense of that like commuter level data. This, and I'm gonna go share my screen, combines full-time sort of commuter jobs, like the one, you know, like a 9 to 5, I'm commuting to my desk or, you know, my shop, with also like part-time work with things like more casual work. You know, if I'm like selling something online, that would count as a job in jurisdiction, but that won't necessarily be commute. Or if you're you know, like working at a daycare wouldn't be necessarily a commute, but that would be a job. So it's yeah, there it's kind of a situation where we have very precise numbers, but they don't quite fit in that way. That makes you think you can draw, like, it makes perfect sense to draw that conclusion, but it's just, the more point we're saying is a lot of people are commuting. And I think that that's something that we'd all like to see decrease, and we're looking at ways to do that. But it would be a lot trickier to say we're going to go from 96% to 73%, for example. That would be, yeah, tough, for lack of a better planning word.
Yeah, I think if we had a better number, I think that would be, you know, when I just did this math, I was like, whoa, that seems like a lot. And I am sure that there really are a lot. So, and I know that, you know, because of the shape of our city, as you guys mentioned in this, that it is very easy to commute from Atherton to Menlo Park, or from, you know, Mountain View, maybe even to Menlo Park, but we don't have a sense for those vehicle miles traveled. So to the extent that we could add something in that might help us really get a handle on that, especially as we begin to work on trying to reduce it and find other ways to get our workers here, I think that would be super helpful if there's another way. Okay, so I just also wanted to highlight page 3-24 when we're talking about seniors and figure 3-21. I think when I kind of add up all those numbers, it looks like there are nearly 1,000 low-income seniors that are currently cost burdened. So that also stood out to me as a pretty high number. If that's not right, please jump in. So I just wanted to highlight, I think there are a number of places actually in this chapter 3 where I kind of calculated the number based on the percentage. So I think to the extent that there are some times when we want to see what a raw number might look like, I think that would be helpful. And this is that seniors one is something that when I was just looking at percentages, I was like, oh, and then when I added it up, I was like, well, 1,000 people that's a lot of low income seniors that are currently cost burdened. So that kind of worried me. I think maybe I will, I think I can stop there and come back when we get to the policies and programs. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Harris. All right. Next up, I have Commissioner Tate. No, she's just kidding. Okay, great. All right. Thank you for that then. Okay, so we have, if there aren't any other comments that either commission would like to address to the first 6 chapters, I know that we've been going for an hour and a half. Do people want to keep going, take a few minutes break? Commissioner Merriman.
Let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
I'd love to keep going. I have one more question. It's if I could circle back, it is of those first chapters, and it's really for Ms. Chow. If she could help me understand what some of the triggers in Menlo Park are to that move an applicant into the territory of needing to complete and get started with a full-blown EIR. And some of the, and I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly from other planning documents or not, but there's been a few times where it struck me that the overall number of trips that needed to be generated before it's assumed that you would do the EIR is quite low relative to our neighbors or really anywhere that I've worked in development. And I'm wondering if you can shed some light on that, because the timeframes that this document did such a nice job of building, so you could really see as an applicant how certain procedures add time when you can expect to that you would need more time for review. The EIR is kind of the biggest one, because it's if you hit that threshold, it's 52 weeks of additional time. So maybe you can help me think through, are there a few places where our triggers are just so low that it is requiring more time and more, not just of the applicant to get through, but also more staff time, more review? And could those be looked at as lessening a governmental constraint?
Thank you for the question. And yes, I was thinking of the chart where it says, yes, if you go into EIR, that triggers a minimum of a year-long process. And so as part of development review, there is the California Environmental Quality Act, which requires each project to go through some level of environmental review. We could go from an exemption, so a categorical exemption, which is identified by the state, or to the other level, it would be an EIR, which is a much more time-intensive process, as Commissioner Merriman noted. I think one thing that you mentioned about transportation, so we have changed our transportation requirements. So we still require a transportation impact analysis, but I think maybe what you were referring to was our level of service trigger and potentially the 0.8 seconds of delay, which was very much a kind of a low threshold, if you will, in order to potentially trigger an impact. And so now with our move towards VMT, it's a different metric, a different sort of analysis that we do, but we still, as part of our general plan analysis consistency finding, we still do LOS analysis, but it's not a CEQA finding, if you will. So you'll often see in our projects, we identify both our VMT potential impacts as well as our LOS from a general plan conformance, but those are not mitigation measures, which may trigger an EIR. So I think in terms of like,
are you finding more or fewer projects or more projects with the change to VMT?
I think the VMT, like if you're putting so the goal with VMT is putting the housing near the job employment. And so I think we are, as we're starting to develop the housing near our employment centers, near our commercial centers, near our downtown, and we are starting to see fewer impacts from a transportation's perspective. You will see a number of our Bayfront area projects have an EAR because that was part of a settlement agreement. So that was sort of like on a different track, and why you see a number of those projects go through an EIR process. How housing projects come out of this process are housing opportunity sites. We are doing a supplemental environmental impact report, as was noted in the presentation. There will be CEQA requirements for projects as development comes online, whether they can build off of our CEQA document, whether they're categorical exemption or fall within a categorical exemption. That will be determined on a case-by-case basis as we see. But certainly we've seen some changes in CEQA where there are starting to have categorical exemptions for infill type projects. I know I just was speaking with someone in Burlingame who said that they use like an infill exemption to move forward a larger project. And so we would need to explore how a project might fit within some of those different buckets.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both for that. And that was regarding table 5-8 on page 5-33, I believe, if you wanted to check out the typical processing times. Okay, I think that was the last of the comments from our commissioners regarding chapters 1-6. So we can repeat now the process for chapter 7, which is the site and analysis chapter. Housing Commission members, would you like to provide any comments on chapter 7? Commissioner Leach, I turn to you.
I noticed that there's mention of the SRI project on page 7-5 as one of the pipeline projects. And I know I hear about this from everyone I know. People that aren't paying any attention to housing in the area are aware of the SRI project. And I have to admit that for all the stuff I've read about it, I'm not clear on where we are with the process. And I understand it's going to be mixed use. Can I get some clarification on that? And I apologize if it's in the document and I just don't see it.
Tom or Deanna?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Leach. So the SRI project is can be considered a pipeline project. So you'll notice on the chart, I apologize, I don't have the exact table in front of me, but they do list projects that have been
7-4.
7-4. Okay, thank you. Projects that have been approved and projects that may be considered a pipeline project. And so just page 7-4, I can note that project A, B, C, and D have been approved and are at various stages of the building permit process. There are other projects, E, F, G, and H, which are still pending. So they are still under review, but the state does allow jurisdictions to count projects that have not yet been occupied and projects that are pending as part of their pipeline and can be attributed to their RENA cycle. So with SRI, it is very much in the beginning stages of the development review. The Planning Commission conducted a study session about a month or two ago. The City Council just recently conducted a study session last Tuesday evening. We've shared comments, I've heard comments, received comments from both planning commissioners and members of the City Council about adding additional housing to the site, particularly looking at a 1-acre carve out for affordable housing. And so those are some of the comments that we have received regarding that site, which the applicant will be taking into consideration. So what we've presented here was what we knew at the time of the application. That's currently what it is today, the 400 housing units, but that is something that is certainly up for conversation, discussion. It is still it's still pending. And so this one, someone might be unique. They're going through their own master plan project. They're going through some very complex entitlements in terms of creating their own zoning district and creating a master plan that is unique to that particular site. So it doesn't fall within sort of a standard zoning district that is currently within the city.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Leach. Commissioner Pimentel.
I think this is the right section to raise this question, and I also apologize if staff can just point me to where in the document this discussion might occur. I could take my question offline. But there's been some discussion recently of developing the Flood Park housing, the Flood Park School as a potential teacher housing site. And I'd like to know if it would be appropriate to, if it's not included, to include that in the housing element as a discussion with whatever constraints or study requirements the city might want to put on this, specifically how the transportation might affect the suburban park community and specific mitigations to alleviate that traffic concern, and or the number of housing units that might be placed there. There appears to be some confusion in the public discourse as to what the Ravenswood School District might be proposing versus what a R2 designation might enable. And maybe this is a place where we could provide some certainty to all parties involved and reduce the anxiety around that item specifically. Is that in the document, and is this an appropriate place for us to have that discussion in the housing element?
Commissioner, the site number 38, we're calling it the former flood school site to avoid any confusion about Flood Park itself.
That's right.
So that's about 2.5 acre site. It's site number 38. It's one of only 2 vacant sites in the entire housing opportunity site inventory. We've identified it as eligible for a base zoning. We're recommending a base zoning of 30 units per acre. Currently, it's zoned R1, single family residential, even though it was a former school site. That's the existing zoning. So that would require an upzoning to bring it up to the 30 dwelling units per acre. And then as a policy, the housing element recommends that every housing opportunity site is eligible for 100% affordable housing projects to go up to 100 dwelling units per acre. And quite frankly, that is what the neighbors are understanding correctly and are concerned about. And there was basically a dedicated community meeting with over 100 attendees that voiced that loud and clear to the project team just a couple of weeks ago, less than a couple of weeks ago, early May. Having said all that, totally separate from the housing element, procedurally at least, the school district through its own governance is pursuing the reuse of the site and talking about 100% affordable housing project focused on teachers and staff of the Ravenswood School District, and that would consist of, I believe, 90 units. However, there's been no formal application. There's been no pre-application. So we can't treat it as a pipeline project necessarily, but it's starting to kind of shape up in that direction. So it's really a matter of syncing up the housing element with what the school district is pursuing on the site to the extent that the city feels that's appropriate. At this point, we're kind of sticking to basic housing element framework for that site, but there is that other effort ongoing, which is creating that sense of disconnect.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm familiar with the sense of disconnect. That's why I raised it. And maybe we could use this document to call out in that discussion so that both sides could continue the communication, and planning could be done in a way that addresses the neighborhood's needs, but also provides new housing for our teachers who are serving our community. Thank you very much.
And for those following along, just for ease of reference, that would be a discussion found on page 7-17 or in the appendix 7-5 in the site sheets regarding site number 38. Okay, do I have any other housing commissioners who have any commentary that they'd like to share? Commissioner Merriman.
Hi. I really liked looking at the maps, the fair housing maps, and found the one, especially for the transportation access, to be really illuminating. And I wonder if there is a way to present something similar, but really, instead of using some of that information as part of the fair housing analysis, look at the universe of sites and properties in Menlo Park that would potentially be, that could potentially access AB 1763. And I bring it up in sort of a high level idea that's really about the transparency of some of the key pieces of information here. So, in subsequent chapters, AB 1763 comes up as an alternative to the affordable housing overlay. And it's just because it's a tool that's a pretty powerful tool for increasing density, adding 3 stories and unlimited density within a half mile of transit, taking parking down to 0.5 stalls per unit. I would just like to see a little bit on that because it is a tool on the books. San Mateo has used it, embraced it. The city wanted to use that on a publicly owned site. And while the designation of 30 units per acre is accurate, there's also there's state changes and other tools that may mean that what you end up with there might not be 30 units an acre. And so in efforts to just kind of bridge the text with also other tools that might create a different outcome, I'm hoping that we can see a little bit of analysis on some of that. And I'd be interested in subsequent meetings of understanding kind of how to kind of present both of those universes as true. Thanks.
The affirmative, I'm just going to keep telling people where things are so that they can find them for ease as we're following along. But the affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH, maps are in Appendix 7-2. If you want to take a look at those, there are about 5 of them, and they illustrate what Commissioner Merriman was saying. Do I have any other housing commissioners who would like to speak about Chapter 7, the site inventory and analysis? Okay, hearing none, I will just say that I really appreciated again, seeing how the pipeline projects were laid out. But also I really appreciated the realistic capacity discussion that you guys had. I thought that it was really useful to know that under that approach, we could increase the capacity of affordable and market rate units. I'm particularly interested in making sure that those are in resource-rich environments. So I thought it was lovely to see how all of those were called out. Okay, so with that, I guess I will end Housing Commission comments on Chapter 7. And now we'll turn to Planning Commission, Chapter 7, Site Inventory and Analysis. Do I have any comments from the Planning Commission regarding Chapter 7? Commissioner Thomas.
Sure, thank you. So I guess one thing that surprised me about the inventory was how many of these are kind of repurposing parking lots. And I guess my one question there is like, is there risk putting all the kind of RENA eggs in some sense in one basket? And I guess on like the individual site descriptions, there is this region-wide market trends and conditions. So I'll quickly repeat the 3 sentences here. Several jurisdictions in San Mateo and Western Santa Clara County have redeveloped downtown parking lots into affordable housing, notably Redwood City and the city of San Mateo. Eliminating land costs significantly increases the financial viability of affordable housing, and focus group discussions of affordable housing developers stated they are concentrating their efforts on properties that are near transit and amenities in areas rated as high resource or above the tax credit allocation committee, such as this one. So yeah, I guess my question for the representatives from the M group is, one, is there a history of successful conversions of this type in Menlo Park? And 2, I guess what are some specific examples in Redwood City and the city of San Mateo where this conversion has happened? And again, all this is kind of to get at, to just make sure that we aren't putting too many eggs in this basket that maybe it doesn't come to fruition.
And
thank you.
Commissioner Thomas, I'm just making sure we're talking about the parking lots, the potential findings for development of non-vacant sites. That sound right?
Yes, across districts 4 and 5 primarily.
Perfect. So page 7-20.
So I'd like to kind of start out at a high level and kind of zero in on the more specific elements of your question and concern. And I tend to think of parking lots in a suburban community like Menlo Park, like all of our suburban communities, San Jose, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, cities in San Mateo County, where most of the properties have been developed to some extent. So in almost every case, we're dealing with non-vacant properties. And the use of parking lots in and of itself almost represents the new type of, the closest thing we have to vacant land, other than the 2 vacant parcels we've identified, is parking lots. It's a very, very low value use of land. And anytime we see intensification in a downtown setting, in a suburban setting, even in a university campus setting such as Stanford, we're seeing repurposing of service parking lots into buildings, essentially. And that's the pattern we see over time. So we don't feel like we have a lot of good choices around that. We've pretty much ruled out taking down existing residential units in pursuit of new residential units because of the equity and displacement issues that creates. And so we're really kind of having to deal with the land resources that we have that are available in that context. So to me, that's kind of the high level planning justification. On a more practical basis of looking at case studies and examples, we see in Redwood City and San Mateo and Burlingame the use of city-owned land mostly to take those parking lots offline and replace them with infill housing development. Sometimes also replacing the parking through structured parking, or not fully replacing it. So we do see examples of that, and then we do also occasionally see on private properties carving out a portion of a site that is over parked, close to transit, where the portion of the parking lot could be used for a more productive use, such as housing. And we could work on identifying more examples of those. But in our development review planning practice that we provide throughout the Bay Area, we do see a lot of that.
Thank you, Jeff. And Commissioner Thomas, I'd also say that anecdotally at public comment for some housing commission meetings, we've had both advocates and developers alike come and ask what folks were doing about the parking lots for many years.
Thank you.
Was that the end of your question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Vice Chair Harris.
Thanks. I had a couple of questions on the sites. I really, like some other folks, I went on the bike ride across Menlo Park to look at some of these sites, and it was super informative. It's also really terrific to have a page on each site, so I'd like to thank you all for that. My concern, and I have raised this before, but I kind of want to get it on record again, is I'm just concerned that many of the sites are just unlikely to develop into housing, and especially affordable housing, which of course is the main thing that we need. And my understanding is that we're required to provide substantial evidence that our sites might develop. And I'm kind of fearful that our housing element is maybe not going to pass muster with HCD if we don't have adequate substantial evidence. And especially on some of the sites like the 2 Safeway sites, the Robin Hood headquarters, all the Sandhill offices, and those make up a pretty sizable portion of our list. So and of the total housing. And given that really we will make our number for above moderate, or I'm sorry, market rate housing, but it's really the affordable that's going to be the biggest issue. If one of you all could, maybe from the city or from M Group, just kind of give me an update on where we are on having this substantial evidence, and if we don't have it now, how do we expect to get it before we submit? And if we submit and it doesn't pass, then what happens? That's a lot of questions in one question.
Can we start with asking if there is a definition for substantial proof or evidence?
is there a definition of substantial evidence?
That would be a good place to go from. And then I think we can talk about tracking all of these things. Jeff?
Yeah, I don't have the definition on the tip of my tongue of substantial evidence, but I can give some examples of what HCD, which is the California's Department of Housing and Community Development, that provides the ultimate review and certification of the city's housing element. And we have taken advantage of the fact that Southern California is on a different cycle than the Bay Area. And so we're able to look at draft housing elements that have been sent up to HCD, public documents. And then we're able to look at the letters that HCD has sent back to those jurisdictions, asking for this information that we're talking about now. What evidence do you have that these sites are going to develop during the planning period? And the thing that is tricky about this, of course, is that no one has a crystal ball. No one can say with absolute certainty what's going to happen over the next 2 months, much less over the next 8 years. And so a lot of it is pointing to sort of, in my mind, it's sort of like indirect evidence. If you can point to a pattern within the community, or even with your nearby region, with your surrounding communities, of similar things happening. And if you're able to describe it and sort of be able to be accurate about what is happening in the marketplace between developers and property owners, and what are the patterns that we see in terms of buildings being taken offline for their historic traditional use and being replaced by a new use, such as 100% housing, 100% affordable housing, a mixed use development with a mix of commercial and residential. That is the type of evidence that HCD is looking for. It's not necessarily a signed affidavit from the property owner and the developer and the banker saying that they're going to build X number of units. It's really painting a picture, persuasive picture, that there's trends happening, these types of developments happening, and under what conditions that make them happen. Density, parking requirements, processing times, EIR, no EIR. If you can show that the city is proactively, methodically dealing with each of these possible impediments and removing possible impediments, that's the kind of evidence they're looking for. And then there's also negative things that you can show you either have or you don't have. And the classic example is long-term leases. Long-term leases is something that just take a property out of the realm of this idea of that it will develop within the 8 years. Property owner support or non-support in and of itself is not a deciding factor. HCD knows and city planners know that properties do change hands occasionally, not a lot, under Prop 13, but non-residential properties, most of these are, do occasionally change hands or go from generation to generation, or the city changes something about the underlying density, the development framework that controls for that property, and people get fresh ideas. They take a new look at things, and a no can become a maybe, can become a yes. We're going to do that. We're going to do this thing now. So it's really a whole mosaic of facts and circumstances and specific things we can point to justify the inclusion of certain properties.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you both. Chair DeCarty, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Chair Bigelow. First of all, you're doing a fabulous job tonight. I really appreciate your leadership, and I appreciate you breadcrumbing for everybody into the document. So thank you for that. I'd echo the thanks to everybody for their time and energy to put this together, staff and the folks from M Group. I really appreciate the commissioner questions and comments, very illuminating. And I really appreciate the public comment. A bunch of them were extremely helpful. I think the main thing for my comment in general in this section would be if I could just have what Pam Jones's public comment was come out of me as eloquently, I think that would be about 95% of what I would like to say. The one thing I would like to say is actually it picks up on the theme that Vice Chair Harris had about this question of credibility and whether they'll actually will get built or not. And I really appreciate your answer, Mr. Bradley. And I think my question comes in this kind of way. We are going to put this document in place. And this document for the next 8 years will be the de facto thing that we're doing as a community for affordable housing. That's it. That's what we're going to come back to again and again and again. And it's in some ways, it's a shame because we are doing this for a mandate, but it actually isn't all we should be doing as a community around affordable housing. But it means this document is extraordinarily important because it's going to become a shorthand for us for the next 8 years. And so I think this is my comment to exactly what you just said, Mr. Bradley, which is by the same definition of we don't know what's going to happen for the next 8 years, and that credibly something like Quadras at Sand Hill Road could turn over and become affordable housing, is the same reason why I think we need to go back and include the stuff that actually is more likely, which is where you can reduce the costs, and those are the land costs, and that becomes what we already own as a city. And so this gets back to the Civic Center question, the beginning comment for Commissioner Tate in this evening. There's absolutely no reason in my mind why the same logic does not include looking at the Civic Center or looking at the potential for density at a former school that is already scraped clean, all of those things. So we need to be able to have this conversation as a community. And if we need to look at all of these options, that makes sense, but we can't take them off the table right now because that's going to unfairly hamper this community over the next 8 years. So I think that's hugely important. And I think it's incumbent upon us to put a document that actually spreads that envelope in both directions. And if there's going to be some piece of property that you could not buy the land for more than some extraordinary amount of money that somehow magically is going to turn into affordable housing, then we need to go the other direction, which is to say there could be extraordinary community opposition to something that doesn't look like it would ever credibly change. But yet, look what could happen over the course of these 8 years. Massive changes could happen. We absolutely need to include both of those if we're going to have a reasonable document to work from as a community. And that would be my main point of emphasis for what otherwise I think is a fantastic roadmap for us to use through this period. So thank you. Thanks for the effort and the work on all of it.
I echo a lot of your sentiments, Chair DeCarty. I am hopeful that some of the details will become clear as we go through this process, and we'll be able to return to this document over and over again over the next 8 years, as you say. All right, Commissioner Riggs, I'm looking at you.
Thank you, and good evening. I have maybe 5 or 6 points to make, and I will try to be a little bit organized, although I think this 700-page document by itself defeats any attempt to bring all one's thoughts into a neat package. I do want to make a couple of overview comments first. I remind myself that this document exists because we are required to provide it. The city of Menlo Park is not itching to increase its traffic, its use of water, its use of energy. We are doing this because we are told by people from Sacramento that we must, in effect, although we have our own Bay Area government which has agreed to do this. My two main concerns are how do we do a job productively and usefully? And in this case, this is provide a missing level of housing. And comments have already been made, I think wisely, about what is missing and what is being produced are not exactly the same thing. Between that and maintaining, if not, I hope, improving the quality of life of Menlo Park. I mean, we who are volunteers are volunteering for the city, not for a city of corporate owners, not for a city of future residents, not for a city of future workers. We are here volunteering for the roughly 36,000 residents, current residents of this town. And I like to keep that in mind when we talk about organizing our world for social betterment. It's easy to forget whose town this is. So one of the things that we have succeeded in doing, and perhaps we should re-examine, is that we have enabled the construction of upper market housing. And in some cases, we have packaged that as an enablement of office space to the benefit of development and the investors in these developments. I think it's best, again, in the name of the residents of this city that we hope to serve, that we are careful just what it is we are working so hard to enable. If what we are missing is predominantly affordable units, and in parenthesis, I will note that an awful lot of people think whenever you're talking about housing, they think, oh, thank heavens, some people are doing something about affordable housing. And as we see, we build very, very little affordable housing. We build market rate, high profit housing. That's what we do. This housing element will necessarily produce, more than anything, more high profit market rate housing. That's what it will do ultimately. I believe we need to, as others have said before, use city-owned property because it is the only property that comes with a land value that we can adjust. Anyone who has done a development pro forma knows that the first line item is land cost. And particularly if you are hoping to develop affordable housing, a high land cost would typically cause you to tear off the first page you started making notes on and go look for another piece of land. So we do have public property. And as Commissioner Pimentel and I pointed out some months ago, our parking lots are available land. And there have been at least 3, I believe, instances on the peninsula where other cities have already gone ahead, developed their city parking lots using a third party, maintaining the parking that supported their retail and providing the required parking for housing on top. And these units are, these projects are lauded. I recognize Mr. Thomas's concern that one might put too many eggs in the basket, but I think there's risk to almost all of these 70-some project sites that are listed. And the 9 parking lots that we have, well, 3 other cities have already shown that they can be developed. I hope not all 9 of them, but listing them as sites only makes sense. I'm I must disagree with the two commissioners who have suggested we should reconsider our civic center, because our civic center is open space. It's public space. It's in effect park space. I mean, most of the time, especially now with our meetings no longer being held in council chambers, when I walk in the civic center, it's not to go in and talk with staff or to participate in a Monday night meeting. It's because, frankly, it's a nice space. And I very much hope we do not lose our public spaces. Parking lots are a different issue, though. So I hope that as we look at these sites, we look at quality of life, which very much at this time in Menlo Park, albeit for some neighborhoods more than others, involves traffic. And when we develop housing on sites that have no public transportation infrastructure, we are simply going to add traffic. Well, and of course, we'll add use of water and other natural resources as we add new citizens, while here we are sitting, working, volunteering into the evening for supposedly the existing citizens that are in Menlo Park. So those are my overview comments, and then just a couple of specific comments. As an architect, I have done multiple ADUs, and while the staff report refers to ADUs somewhat dismissively as being for upper income extended family, I have found that's not true, even in the majority of cases. Most ADUs are used to supplement a way to pay for the incredibly high mortgage involved in owning a Menlo Park property. I also suspect that over a course of 7 years, more than 85 ADUs will be built, even if a proportionate number were not built last year. I'm seeing a great deal of interest. And then finally, I'd like to echo a comment that, while it was not made tonight, has been made a couple of times in meetings with the Planning Commission. And that is that while we back the concept of 100% affordable projects, in spite of the fact that they seem to they do in effect collect people of specific economic groups or lower economic groups in one project, there are benefits. We hope they were not so limited, but they are limited to 100% affordable projects that make them easier to build and make them easier to finance. But these should include for sale units. Even if you build a 48-unit condo building instead of a 48-unit apartment building, they're very much the same, except for separate meters. I know this from having lived twice in apartment buildings that, quote, went condo. And the ability to purchase an entry-level unit is extremely important socially, economically, to those who would like to fully participate in our Menlo Park. And I would have to say that that is one of the strongest recommendations that I could make when it comes to housing. And I apologize that that does not necessarily directly relate to the choice of a housing site, but it does to policy. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Commissioner Riggs. And I had a quick question for you, Jeff, on one of the points that Commissioner Riggs made about the We talked about the parking lots briefly. Commissioner Thomas did as well. Was that part of the other land use quantification or?
The site, for the site strategy?
Yes.
Yes, we have
So, okay,
So
so,
down.
all right, so on page 7-38, and by the way, the only reason that I am able to call out things is because I have an actual hard copy that I'm paging through. But we talk about table 7-15, the projected housing summary. So with all of these, including the parking, including modifying El Camino, specific plan, downtown specific plan, really, we're only projecting that 621 units will come from that?
That doesn't sound right. What table is that you're looking at?
7-15. It's on page 7-38. And we have other land use strategies as the 5th column there. And so we get nothing except above moderate income units from these strategies, and there are only 621 of them.
Okay, so when you're looking at tables 7-15, there's really 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 major categories, and the first one listed is the 6 cycle opportunity sites, and so that's really the main producer of units at all income categories, and that totals up to almost 3,400 units at the bottom there, the subtotal. Then ADUs, you get about 25 per income category, except for above moderate, it's only 8. ADUs actually have a really good distribution based on very detailed survey work that's already been accepted by HCD. That was done on a regional basis with the 21 elements group that Deanna talked about. Provides 85 units. The pipeline projects is actually the biggest category at over 3,600 units. And then the other land use strategies. Ashley, can you remind me what the 621 is picking up for other land use strategies?
Sure. That is, if you go up to page 7-37, explains it a bit. So as part of the zoning update that's happening concurrently with the housing element, the city's looking to modify the El Camino Real downtown specific plan, rezone commercial only sites, and modify R3 zoning around downtown. And Deanna Chow or someone from the city can speak more to that. But the reason why these 621 units are additional and above moderate income is because when we were looking at the zoning ordinance, we weren't sure which parcels these would necessarily apply to. These are zoning district-wide changes. And we have specific sites in the site inventory that are in the downtown specific plan or in R3, are in commercial areas. And for them, we did a detailed site-specific analysis, which you can see in the site sheets we discussed. But we knew that when we make these changes, it's going to have knock-on effects that we can't necessarily, we don't have that crystal ball, and we don't know how they're going to affect parcels citywide. So we said, we were analyzing this, we knew there was going to be some additional housing development, but because we wouldn't necessarily have that substantial evidence for which parcels they would be, what sort of units would come out of that, we put this into the above moderate category because we knew we wouldn't be able to demonstrate to HCD like we can with the site inventory that they would necessarily go towards lower income housing.
So essentially those are citywide zoning changes that will encourage some increased housing development, but it's not the main, it's totally separate from the housing opportunity sites themselves.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you so much for explaining that. Okay, Commissioner Barnes.
Lauren, you have been absolutely wonderful tonight. It's as if my high school biology teacher has come and is leading me and has woken me up because I was sleeping in high school biology, by the way. So I want to say thank you, of course, to staff for putting this together and for the M Group for your wonderful work along the way. I have a couple of thoughts, and I'm going to intertwine the section about, or the chapter about sites and the chapter about policy, because there's an opportunity for policy on sites, and I think they kind of run hand in hand. If I think about the SRI site, by way of example, I think two critical housing types that we need there are both the deeply affordable housing and the home ownership housing. And I think in this housing element, we need to get to both of those. And I think home ownership, I'll start from backwards first, often gets lost in this discussion. And if we're looking at, the policy of, I think it was policy 4.5, which talked about equity, I don't think we want to create societies where we're having people be renters in perpetuity. And I don't think that's a healthy model for wealth creation. I don't think it's a healthy model for ownership, within ownership, not from a material sense, but ownership of a community. And I think we need to really pay attention to every opportunity we have to zone purposefully for home ownership and provide densities for townhome opportunities. And that's a policy issue. That's, we talked about the downtown specific plan and really how you create those moments that Jeff Bradley had talked about earlier, which creates opportunities for development. It's either a capital event that happens on the side of the seller where they need to sell, or there's an upzoning opportunity where value is created in the underlying dirt as a result of policy changes. So I think we really need to look at the opportunities to create denser home ownership opportunities in this housing element. And I'm going to take a specific look at that as we work through this. The other piece of this, and what we've seen with this last housing element, is trying to get to meaningful levels of deeply affordable housing through market rate BMR is a fool's errand. We've seen how it doesn't work. We've seen the generation of BMR units in relation to market rate units. You simply can't get there numerically. And some of that, and also the issue of equity comes up there as well. If you assume from an economic standpoint, there are thresholds for developers after which they can't afford to develop. If we take, for instance, Willow Village out of the picture, we've got ostensibly a deep-pocketed ownership entity which has some type of commercial relationship with Signature Properties, fine. But by and large, if you assume that there's an inelastic ability to just absorb incremental reductions in rent, in other words, when you get beyond that 15% threshold for BMR units, what you're in effect doing is you're taxing the person in 5A to support the person in 5B. And is that really the route you want to go down for the hardworking person in 5A, who may have their own set of economics responsibilities and abilities to pay or not pay, to pay for the rent of the person that's next to them? The inverse of that relationship is, how do we create deeply affordable housing that allows for deeper subsidies and commonly used in that sense that affordable housing development community, which accesses tax credits, to make these ELI, the 0 to 30% AMI units, or the 30 to 50% AMI units, the under 60% units that need subsidies for the capital stack. They need to get built, so you need to have built-in subsidies associated with how it is you're going to finance it. And then you've got the operating subsidies associated with running that particular unit for 55 years at a reduced rent, because BMR by nature is a rent that is below market. So the rent has to be subsidized in some way. So when we talk about affordable housing, the lowercase affordable housing, I think we have a tendency to conflate that with cheaper rent. Well, where does the cost of that cheaper rent go to? How does that cost of cheaper rent get distributed amongst the community fairly so that we are all responsible for that burden? And you get there through having these deeply affordable developments which receive subsidies, as opposed to trying to get there through BMR, which will never get there. So I think we really have to look at that if we want to hit the numbers we want to hit from a financing perspective on the lower income units. And we've seen it didn't work in the last housing cycle, and it won't work again. History will repeat itself where you get overstock, oversupply of market rate, and undersupply of the units that we actually want. So how can we create policies or financing mechanisms within the city to fund, to match, to go out and get those financing sources which will allow for those capital stacks and those funding opportunities. So that the deeply affordable housing and the ownership housing being a priority. I will say that I do see the parking lots as being a wonderful opportunity to develop upon, and should be structured as a no-cost opportunity for a developer to come in, replace the parking, and build on top of it. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I don't support it at city center. I think it is a city center. I think that's a town square. I think that is different fundamentally from a parking lot, and I don't think it supports the use by the few as opposed to the use by the many, which it currently represents. I think if you were to look at a development there, I think a community center which along the lines of what was proposed before, which is a lifelong learning center, and then you put housing either next to it or on top of it, I could see that, but I don't see a wholesale conversion to that for the use of housing as being an appropriate use of this town square for that. I think there's other places to do that, and I think the parking lots are the right places for that. And I think the policy 4.2 referenced schools, and I've spoken on this before. I think when we add housing, which we should and need to be doing, we also need to be creating a nexus between the housing and the impacts on the community. And I think we cannot disregard the relationship between housing and schools and the educational responsibility we have to our school districts and to the children who go there, to make sure that we have this relationship between, with housing units built, there's also offsets which are baked in for our school districts to be able to provide the education for the kids that go there when these numbers start to grow, whether it's facilities, whether it is operating budgets. There is a structural deficit by virtue of Prop 13, which calls out for everybody added to a school district, you're running a structural deficit. It is binary, it goes. How is it that when we add these housing units, we are taking that into account? And as a city, we are making sure that we are having a relationship between offsetting that in different ways, monetarily to the school district, so we're not running an educational deficit, which as of right now, due to Prop 13, is structural every time a new student's added. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Barnes. Last time I was a teacher, it was of psychology, not biology. So there you go. And all right, do I have any other comments regarding Chapter 7, site inventory and analysis? All right, and seeing none, I think that we can, last chapter, guys, it's very exciting. Then we can move on to chapter 8, which would be the goals, policies, and programs. I will first turn to my fellow housing commissioners, see if they have any thoughts about these goals, policies, and programs. If you have a specific table that you mentioned, I would just ask you to call it out if you can. Otherwise, I'll try and find it for you following along. Okay, housing commissioners. Oh, don't be shy. Commissioner Leach.
I was frantically searching for the direct reference. I took notes separately.
I'm happy to substitute and help follow along. It's
The,
okay.
talk of the fair chance ordinance. Which and I was just looking this up myself. That struck me. I think that's so I wanted to hear more about that. That it sounds fair-minded and appropriate. And my understanding is it's the idea is not to hold someone's past transgressions against them. Can I hear a little bit more about that?
So we're talking about the renter protection fair chance ordinance?
Yes, and I was just, next time I go through a document like this, I'll make sure to note the page.
No, don't even worry about it.
I could do a search. Let me see.
Thank you.
It's page 334, I believe, or 8-26. Does that
okay.
sound right, Chair Vigila?
Let's see. We said it was 824.
26.
26.
PDF page 334, if you have the
Perfect.
PDF version.
Okay.
And I can speak to that briefly if you'd like.
Fair chance ordinance. Yeah, so it's adopt a fair chance housing access to housing ordinance, which would prohibit housing providers from inquiring about or using criminal history or criminal background as a factor. And I think that sounds very fair. I'm wondering if anyone could expound on that. Are there limits? Is there are there qualifying factors?
There's a great resource website, fairchanceforall.org, and it's fair chance, the number 4 ALL. It would basically the ordinance could be revised, like any ordinance. So there would be hearings, and we'd have to get a sense of what works best for the community. But the general idea is that on many rental applications nationwide, when you put information, you may have to check a box saying, I've been convicted of a crime. And then if you check yes, what was the crime? And this ordinance would not allow that portion to be put into a rental application in Menlo Park. That's the general idea. And I said different jurisdictions, different cities approach it different ways. But the broad idea is that you're not allowed to use that as a screen, to use that question as a way to screen applicants.
Okay.
Which, as a point of clarification, just because I've studied fair chance ordinance, I would also note that while it doesn't allow a housing provider to ask initially, on the physical application, you can have a conversation with a human being and talk about what their experiences are. It's just, you're basically saying that you're not doing a blanket ban against anybody who has had a past history of incarceration, which, as we know, disproportionately impacts folks inequitably.
Right. That sounds okay. Sounds like something I can look into on their website. And I think it's a good idea.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Leach. Do I have any other housing commissioners who'd like to provide comment? No. Okay, so I'm just going to go through my pages then. All right. I really appreciated the emphasis on implementation and trying to have metrics, because that makes it easier to hold ourselves accountable and track these things along the way. So policy H1.1, where we say that City Council is behind the idea of affordable housing, and it's a priority, I think is amazing, as is policy H14. And I love the idea of being able to, you'll soon find that I love data, but I think that program H1.H on page 8-6 is important, just so, again, we can hold ourselves accountable and see how far along the road we are when it comes to meeting our RHNA goals, and not having to wait necessarily until the annual reviews and kind of guessing along the way. Given the import that HCD is placing on affirmatively furthering fair housing, I really appreciated policy H2.7 on page 8-7, developing and enforcing an anti-displacement strategy. I would have, there's some talk of it in program H2.E where, or there's overlap, I guess, from the policy to the program. So it was nice to see who was going to be responsible for it, how it was going to get paid for, and that it would be done within 3 years of the housing element is kind of incredible. And I think having done the work that I've done, both for affordable housing developers and direct service nonprofits, being able to, the pandemic exacerbated a lot of the already deep divides within our community and made things a lot worse. But one of the interesting things that we found was that when people knew about rental housing assistance programs, they actually used them and they kept people housed, which helps us with homelessness issues and also with public health issues. So I appreciated seeing that reference, because through the pandemic, we found out that those programs are actually deeply impactful. And I already talked about how much I liked the modification of the specific plan and the design standards for the parking lots. And I have slight concern about the identification of SB 10 sites because it's supposed to, it looks like that would be one of our last priorities, I guess, because it's done within 5 years of housing element adoption. And I would encourage us to look at that again. And I think that those are all of my comments regarding programs and policies. Last call, housing commissioners. Anybody else want to chime in? Okay, so yay! I have new planning commissioner friends to talk to. Perfect. Okay, so Commissioner Doe.
Thank you, Chair Bigelow. And this is my first time talking tonight. Thank you to everyone who put together this document. Thank you to community members and other commissioners who have been around Menlo Park and this issue of housing longer than I have. I'm learning from all of you. I've lived here 4 years, so I am still learning. I just wanted to make some comments about some of the parking requirements in program H4M, program policy H6.6, program 6E, multimodal improvements. So in listening to community members' comment on Parkline, I heard there were so many comments on concerns about traffic on Laurel, kids biking, very similar to the flood school site. Again, I felt that many of the comments were also on the safety of what are now quiet neighborhood streets where people can scoot, bike, walk. And so I am most excited to see how far we can push changing, reducing, eliminating parking requirements. So because I did not hear anyone say that there will be too many people walking on a sidewalk, or the bike lanes will be crazy, or the buses will be crowded. So I heard no opposition to more people, really the cars. And when you look at initially, you hear 3,000 additional units, and then you look at that table 715, and you're seeing with the pipeline units, and you're seeing with the buffer, I think the total number is 7,000 or around there. And I think it just makes it even more like, wow, that could be a lot of traffic if we don't really push the other things, getting the walkability and the bikeability. So I would say I'm very excited to see those policies and programs and see how far as a community we can push ourselves to change our expectations around parking. And I would be surprised if in a couple of years we would go back and say we should have built more parking. So those would be my comments.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Doe. And one of my favorite points that I learned in working on affordable housing was that I think one of the things that people forget is that when you're income restricted, part of the things that you have to pay for that cost money are things like insurance and a car note. So you don't necessarily have increases in car traffic with 100% affordable housing properties. Okay. Vice Chair Harris.
Thank you. And I would also agree with all that was said on that. But before I do, I also wanted to echo what many others have said. I just really appreciate you, Chair Bigelow, for just stepping up and taking this on tonight. You've done an amazing job in keeping us lined up with which section we're in, and it's really appreciated by all of us, I know. So I had some overall comments, and then I'll go to a couple specifics. I think in general, there's some great goals and policies and programs here. As I read through them, I was struck by the overwhelming responsibilities that are going to be required to both develop and implement all of these programs. And as I look, they mostly fall to our planning division, and I suppose housing as well. And I know that our planning and housing divisions are already pretty stretched, given the number of acting and open positions that we have, as well as the fact that we just have a lot of active projects going on in Menlo Park. And I think to accomplish these goals and policies and programs, we're going to need to increase, and we're kind of already starting from a deficit of folks. So increasing the capacity is something that I'm very concerned about. And along those lines, prioritization, really understanding what's going to go first, what's the timing. And then on some of them, I'd say we're a little too squishy, and I'd like to have some tighter parameters put around some of the programs. So with that, I'd love to see a master timeline on this with all of the programs kind of listed out in some sort of chart, so we can lay it out and really understand, can we do the things in the order that we've kind of gotten them here? And is there a way that we can really understand what we have to do, how many people are we going to need to hire, or can we have some consultants help us out? So I think a master timeline could really help us with this. And one policy that I'd like to pull forward and think through is the design standards. My understanding is that we've been talking about design standards for a while in Menlo Park, and if we had these design standards and then ministerial review, we'd be able to move projects a lot faster with fewer hands. And I know that one of the issues that we're having is that it takes a long time to build in Menlo Park. So if we could think about those design standards and ministerial review and get that sooner in the process, I think the design standards said maybe within 2 years we would maybe start it, and the ministerial review was maybe in 3. So I just want to make sure that we've kind of got that sequenced correctly. Can you hear me? Shoot. AirPods
No, I
died.
heard you.
Okay, my AirPods are dying because it's been a while.
It has, and I so appreciate you staying with us, even though you're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So the ministerial review and the design standards, is that program H4.E? Sort of, kind of?
I'm looking here at my list.
On page 8-21.
Yeah. I'm looking at my list of policies and programs, and now I don't see that one. So anyway, so that's one kind of thought that I have. And then as far as the other programs and policies, yeah, so I think somebody else mentioned H1-4, evaluate the staff capacity and additional resources to monitor and implement the affordable housing policies and projects. Just making sure who's going to do that. Do we kind of have that lined up? Because before we can add capacity, we have to have somebody who's going to really be looking into that. So that's one question I have, or comment, I guess. Let's see, H2-A, these at-risk units. This is an area where I wonder if we could be a little tighter on the language. The program states that the city will inform tenants of any assistance available. And I guess I'd like to revise that and say, that we do have assistance available, and how can we make sure that that assistance is available, and that the tenants at risk, we can get to them in a proactive manner, or they can get to that assistance quickly. To that end, perhaps what we really should do is develop a rental registry so that we know which units are being rented. We can get in touch with tenants and landlords as necessary. I think Samaritan House has been helping us and kind of outsourcing with that. And I'm just wondering if they're the ones that are helping us, should we spell that out more concretely in this document? So that's in H2. Okay, and then I had a question in general. So do we have, I know Palo Alto has kind of a no loss policy, or you can't reduce you can't turn 2 units into 1 unit. You can't, but not only just down zoning, but you can't make any changes like that. Do we have anything in our kind of rules besides whatever the state requires for not allowing down zoning? I guess that would be a question for staff or for the M group. I'm not sure.
I think in the
I was going to reach out to city staff on that. It sounds like a no net loss of housing units is allowed or is that's the concept we're talking about?
Right. And if we have further protections other than what the state allows. Deanna, do you have that, or should we give that to Nira, who I completely didn't introduce at all? And I'm so terribly sorry that I missed you upon first review.
No problem. Nobody likes to introduce the lawyers. Deanna, I'm happy to just speak generally to that. I will defer to Deanna on this first point, which is that no, I don't believe the city has any no net loss provisions in our municipal code. And any of those provisions would now, with the adoption of the Housing Crisis Act, be preempted to a large extent. That is something the city could look at as a policy, but that portion of the Housing Crisis Act is fairly prescriptive, and so I do think we'd run into some preemption issues.
Okay. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. Let's see. On H3.H, we say as part of the development review process, encourage increasing the number of accessible units. I'm not using the word encourage. I just wonder what does that mean, and how can we define that, and put a little bit of guardrails around that. And that can either be a question or it can be a comment of something that we can work on. Okay.
We can work on that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, there's so many things and I don't want to take up all the time. Okay, on H6 also, I agree with Commissioner Doe. I'd like to see how far we can push ourselves in reducing personal automobile usage. I think we need to go deeper on this one. If we're going to increase our housing stock so significantly, we're really going to need to work hard on identifying these multimodal improvements and how, and I'm just hoping maybe we can be a little more prescriptive on how that can be accomplished. If we have some consultants working on that, if we come up with some, different new ideas and some budget for that, I think that's going to help us out a lot, and we're going to have an easier time. And then to that end, I would be really in favor of eliminating parking minimums, especially if we're talking about 100% affordable and some other accessible or senior housing. I just don't think that we need to be having minimums in 2022. Let's see, I already talked about design standards. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
You can keep going. You're the only person. Oh, wait, no, Commissioner Tate.
No, I think Commissioner Tate.
Yes, I see you, Commissioner Tate. I see you. Please.
Okay, good evening. And you are doing a fantastic job. I just have to echo that too. Okay, so I have just like a couple of things. And unfortunately, I didn't write down my program numbers and what have you, but
that's okay.
So now can someone just make sure that I fully understand the accessory dwelling? This is program H2D, and it's for the ADU amnesty program. So does this mean that if an ADU does not comply with current building codes and planning codes, but it is not a threat for health and safety, that it will be grandfathered. Is that what I'm reading this to say?
And that's page
Program
8-9, program H2D.
Right.
Jeff or Deanna, do you guys want to take that?
Sure, I can start off. I do see that Nara jumped on as well, and she may be she may want to reference the current state law that allows for a deferral, I guess is the right word, of enforcing of the building codes or planning development standards if it is not if it's not necessarily currently for health and safety. I think for the ADU amnesty program on H2D, I think we would need to further flesh out what the specifics would be for that, whether it's a continuation of what is under state law today or something more or different. So we don't have necessarily the standards defined today, but it is looking at and recognizing that we have heard that there have been ADUs that have been built, probably ADUs built without the benefit of a permit. And so how do we then seek to provide amnesty for those units because they are providing needed housing in the community? So I don't have the specifics on that, but there's currently a state law that does provide that provision for, I believe, a period of 5 years.
Okay, so is it possible, because the illegal ADUs are definitely in my community in District 1. So is there a way to move this time frame up a little bit, because it's within 3 years, to within 1 year, to go ahead and provide some home security for people who may be living in units that are not up to code? Because we already know that there has been problem historically with code enforcement making it onto people's property and discovering that they have the illegal units, and then there can be a whole family being displaced. Just like the person who was talking earlier, making public comment about a 1-bedroom apartment that was housing 13 people. And we understand that ADUs could possibly be having, multiple families living within them. So if we were able to move that up, then there would be some sense of security for folks.
Michelle, can I pause you there for just 1 second and ask Nero what the current law is? Nira, could you speak to what the current ADU law is?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble with my video. So the current, Deanna summarized the law succinctly. It allows for a deferral of standards in the building code that are not currently up to compliance in existing ADUs. And it allows the building official to provide for such deferral in order for the applicant to maintain the ADU and permit it with the building permit at a future time.
Okay, got it.
So the concern is that it is the time frame says within 3 years of housing element adoption. So if we were able to move that up to 1 year, that would be great.
Yeah, and I don't, that would not be inconsistent with state law. So from a legal standpoint, there would not be any issues with that revision.
Okay.
That's proposed.
Great.
So noted, Commissioner Tate.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. And my other question or comment probably was in the other section, but it's still in the same lines about the ADU units. And it strikes me that they can be used for any income bracket, like they can be counted as moderate. And And especially because we don't really have a grasp of how many ADUs across the city are actually being used as housing units. We had a conversation about this in a previous Planning Commission meeting, and Commissioner Barnes actually is the one who brought it up. And you know, we kind of talked about how a lot of the units are being used as offices or play areas, or, you know, an extension of the house as opposed to actually being rented out. So I'm struck by that, counting them when we have no real way of knowing whether or not they are actually being part of the housing stock, to be honest. So I'm not sure how to monitor that, or if there is some sort of way so that we have more accurate numbers.
That's a great point, Commissioner Tate. I think when I was doing below market rate administration for another city, they tried to administer programs, so use the ADUs as lower income housing partially, and they ran into a somewhat similar problem of how do you actually administer that day to day? What does that look like? And how do you keep compliant with that? It's a tough one. Okay, thank you for your comments, Commissioner Tate. Vice Chair Harris.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to go back a couple more points on H2. So if we look at H2B, the subpoint E, which reads, consider rezoning of properties for consistency to match and protect their existing rental uses. I was just wondering what the intent of that sentence was, because it seems that it could be taken a couple different ways. So that's program H2.B and E, the very last one here. Consider rezoning of properties for consistency to match and protect their existing residential uses. So I don't know if that's for staff or Jeff, for you.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm going to kick it to the group first, and that's page 8-8 for those following along.
Sure, I can help. Oh.
I was going to just point out that the text before you get into the A, B, C, D, E talks about address residential displacement impacts. So it's really, the intention is to protect existing residential uses from being displaced.
Okay, so my concern, the way it's written, is that it could be used, or I mean, it looks like it also could be, oh, well, I just don't want any down zoning based on this. So I just wonder if the way it's written, it seems like it could be kind of taken either way.
Sure, we can take a look at that. And as Mr. Bradley mentioned, it was intended to ensure that if there was a residential property on, say, a commercially zoned piece of land, that it would be rezoned so that it would maintain its residential use and not be converted to a non-residential use.
Okay, thank you. And then just also on the same one, the ADUs that Commissioner Tate was talking about, I would agree that we need to move that timeline up if we could. And I think from a staff time frame, I don't think it's going to take more staff time to move this up. And in fact, it will eliminate some if we don't have to spend as much time complying with the building codes or planning development standards, as long as we have safety. So I just wanted to echo Commissioner Tate. And then on H2.E, which is on page H2. Okay,
the anti-displacement strategy, it's on page 8-9.
Yeah, so on that one, one of the things that we're talking about is going into neighborhoods and no, I can't find it. And talking to folks. And I feel like we've already done this. Don't we have the Y plan and some other things? And I want to not have to go in and ask the same people the same questions again. I'd rather just we work on preventing evictions and increasing housing quality. So I just want to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and doing some more of the same types of questionnaires or going back into the community for the same thing again. So I'd like to ask a little bit about that and what the intent there was, and if there's another way to get at kind of what the community already said that they want.
Right. That was one of the differences between the develop and enforce anti-displacement strategy on page 8-7 and the actual program of an anti-displacement strategy. Agree that working with the neighborhood and community groups does seem like things that we have said and done before. M Group, do you want to talk about the difference between the policy and the program?
I'm sorry, Chair Bigelow, I had a little blackout there.
That is a-okay. Essentially what, and I'm paraphrasing, Vice Chair Harris was talking about was we have policy H2.7 on page 8-7 that talks about working with the neighborhood and community groups and doing outreach with them and talking with them, which are all wonderful and laudable things and all things that we've done. And I would hope that we would continue to do with each new development. There's also a program that references an anti-displacement strategy that's called out in program H2.E on page 8-9. So did you want to talk a little bit about the difference between those two things? Is initially, I believe Brittany was talking about how the policy flowed into programs. Is that an example of that?
Exactly. The policy is shorter and says what needs to happen. And then the program is a little longer and has more detail about how that's going to happen. So they're really a matched pair, those two.
Right. So my concern was about the program. Where it says meet with individuals and organizations in historically segregated neighborhoods to develop an anti-displacement strategy. And my concern is that we have already done that. We've already gone in and met with individuals and organizations in historically segregated neighborhoods through a number of different, the Y plan and some other studies. And so I just want to make sure that we're not taxing the same people, asking them the same questions, and instead actually doing something to increase housing quality and preventing evictions.
So pulling from the work we've already done to actually establish a plan. That makes sense. You're speaking wisdom. And okay, how do you guys feel? I so appreciate the anti-displacement strategy and think conversations with the communities are important, but if we already have the community telling us what they need, how do we make sure that that is heard on the record in public comment? I guess is my question.
I read this program to really be about keeping the dialogue open, and it really does tie into the environmental justice portion of this project as well, of building that capacity in order to engage effectively with all segments of the community. And so I don't think it's enough to say, oh, we've talked about this in the past, so we're going to take what we know and implement it with all the details that involves. This basically holds the city to task to keep that dialogue open and allow the community members or share with the community members that decision-making process.
That's fair.
Okay. Yeah,
Change.
I would agree. We want to keep the dialogue open. I just know that we have been told, I think, numerous times what is needed, and I think we just need to do it. So that would be kind of my point.
Yes, and
yeah,
we kind of bring to the community some of the solutions they've talked about in the past and see if those still meet needs or not.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you. And I will leave it there and let somebody else talk.
Perfect. Thank you. All right.
If I may,
Commissioner Riggs, please.
Commissioner Bigelow or Chair Bigelow, if I may, through the chair, very quickly, I just wanted to highlight the housing assistance program that the city currently coordinates with Samaritan House, as well as an upcoming program, which will be a home ownership preservation program that we'll be doing jointly with Habitat for Humanity. That'll be targeted in the Belhaven neighborhood. So staff is working closely with Habitat to hopefully launch that program this summer, and we'll be working on marketing. So I just wanted to highlight that for the public who's listening in about programs that are currently going on, and definitely appreciate Vice Chair Harris's comments as well about continuing the conversations in that regard. So I just wanted to highlight those and take that opportunity.
Mike, before you go,
you.
I have a quick money question for you because we were just talking about it. So I'm just going to be ADHD and hop right in. There's a reference program H1.I, I think, where we talk about the below market rate housing fund. Is that every 2 years?
That's a great question. We've opened in the last NOFA, we did make a note in the application, not that we can't improve the outreach on that component, but we did note in the application that we would take over the counter applications potentially that would come into the city. This is all dependent on the amount of funding that's available in our BMR housing fund. And we are expecting increases as developments move forward in the city, but the timing of those payments essentially to the city is sometimes difficult to track. But we are, as far as a regular schedule, it is a biannual release as far as our NOFA, and the NOFA essentially stands for a notice of funding availability, and that would go out to, we mostly see nonprofit housing developers applying for the use of those funds. So most notably, we had a 5.5 million was awarded to HIP Housing for the site acquisition of 6 and 8 Coleman Place in this most recent NOFA release, which was the 2020 release, just about 2 years ago. So we are approaching another NOFA release upcoming, and then the 1.2 million for the Home Ownership Preservation Fund was included in that with Habitat for Humanity. And then there's a pending proposal for 335 Pierce, which is owned by Mid-Penn Housing, to bring ownership units. So those are all items that staff is working on actively, and those are it does take time to bring those through to fruition. As you can tell, we released the NOFA about 1.5 years ago or so. So bringing those forward does take time, but we are moving forward. Happy to answer any other questions.
Appreciate that so much, Mike. I know how important local funding can be to the development of housing, so I hesitate at it only being every other year, but I guess I'd want to check with Mira to see if that was right. I just want to make sure that, which is not calling you into question, Mike, at all.
No, and I apologize if I wasn't clear in my description. So the over-the-counter essentially opens any interested party to apply or so request an application. Essentially, we would probably provide the latest year's application. Somebody would submit that application to bring affordable housing. They would have to meet the guidelines of previous NOFA cycles, but we would most likely provide them with the most recent. And the over-the-counter does open it to any time in between the releases as well, dependent on funding availability.
Got it. Appreciate it. So I'm hearing rolling opening for NOFA with a marketing push, I guess, for every 2 years. Okay.
Yeah, I have nothing further to add and agree with.
Thank you, Nira. I appreciate it. Okay, Commissioner Riggs, thank you so much for being so patient with me. Please.
I just wanted to circle back to the discussion about ADUs because I hate to leave the group with an optimism that isn't justified. As an architect who, besides doing ADUs, I have also come to the assistance of at least 2 different property owners whose ADUs were reported as non-conforming and which were shut down and the tenants left. And in one case, it took 1.5 years to resolve the issues because when you're non-conforming with code, if you think 700 pages is tough to read, try conforming to 700 pages, which is roughly the size of the building code. And not to mention a separate and rather duplicating fire code. So we actually, my client was, I believe, the first in Menlo Park to try to take advantage of the amnesty and then in the end, the deferment of code enforcement. And essentially it left him, besides the absence of rent for over 1 year, and obviously the effect it had on the would-be tenant, and this of course is an affordable place. This is why they're non-conforming, because they're old. Besides that, his conclusion was the process, paying fees, paying an architect, and attacking multiple issues multiple times through the bureaucracy, that under no conditions would he ever apply for either deferment or the amnesty again. That frankly, it is a better business decision to be under the radar and stay under the radar until you have to sell the property. So the idea of the ADU amnesty was a good idea, but the city was not able to put it into practice. The other thing, and this was roughly 1 year ago, the other thing that I have to mention about ADUs, the one reason why we might actually be limited to only 85 units over the next 7 years is that whatever the intentions of Menlo Park may be, to occupy an ADU, you have other agencies that you have to clear. The most expensive agency would be the fire district. Fire divisions do not have any oversight in the state of California. They do have, pardon my being blunt, they do have former firemen who are extending their careers in order to get a full 30 years and the most impressive pensions that they do have. And they are looking for things to ask you to do and looking for things to review. And my experience, again, serving clients, is that cost is no object. It also happens to be in our code that you may have a 1950 property and all your neighbors may have been built in 1950, but when you build a new ADU, with all the most modern requirements. And it is probably the most safe construction, in particular fire safe construction, that has ever been built. That is the project that requires fire sprinklers. And you're talking a minimum of $15,000 to add to what you had hoped would be an ADU that maybe you could throw together for 50,000. Some have tried for 20,000. I just completed a small ADU, very economically built, that was $250,000 to build. And something like 20% of it was for the fire sprinklers. And that's the most expensive part. And then the longest part of the schedule is PG&E, because PG&E does not even look at scheduling your project to engineer it, not to serve it, for a minimum of 6 months. And that's assuming you have your application in order. So what we have with our expectations for the ADU run up against the fact that there are a couple of other agencies whose assistance is required, and that assistance is simply not forthcoming, nor is there any facility to encourage those two agencies to help. So one thing the city of Menlo Park might do, along with the other cities of the peninsula, would be to lobby their state senator and assemblyman to modify the oversight of these two agencies so that they are in sync with our efforts to provide housing at a lower cost in a mutually beneficial way on existing property.
20% of a $250,000 unit, $50,000 was on fire sprinklers. I'm
But
impressed.
when you include all of the costs, actually, yes, it was 20,000 just for to pay the plumber. If you make the mistake, and you really don't want to do this, looking at deferred rent and additional drywall cost and coordination, when inevitably the contractor had assumed one thing and in fact the fire sprinklers took it over, the costs go up very quickly. Yes, and I apologize, it was 20% of the base cost, not the ultimate 250.
Well, that makes me feel slightly better about it being an economical choice, but
Oh, sure, it's only tens of thousands.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Riggs. Commissioner Tate.
Yes, I just wanted to circle back. Vice Chair Harris mentioned program H2E, which is the anti-displacement strategies. And I'm just curious as to why the time frame for that whole section is 3 years to implement from adoption of the housing element. And I feel that 2-3 years from now, there may not be anybody left. So that seems like it's stretched out pretty far. And I just wanted to understand, I do respect staff time, and I know that things will need to get developed. And I do understand short staff currently also, but 3 years is a long time for displacement strategy. So why is it at 3 years for implementation? And is there any way to cut that down to 1 year? Just curious. I don't know if that's staff or M group.
I was going to say, let's start with M group. And if you guys want to kick it to staff, that's fine. Just let us know.
I was going to nominate Deanna to take a swing at that one.
Deanna, it all rests on you.
Sure. So we appreciate certainly the feedback that we're receiving this evening. And so I think there was a recommendation to have the timeline of looking at holistically how all the program implementations fit with one another, and looking at sort of what's happening in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, out through the 8-year cycle. And that will give us a better sense of, prioritization, amount of staff time that might be needed. There are things that are, I think, programmed in the first year that that may be more of a mandate. And so we prioritized those items. Certainly we can reevaluate taking your feedback on what some of the priorities of our commissions are and see if we can reshuffle some things. But I think, as recognized earlier this evening, we are currently facing staffing shortages. We are in the process of hiring, but certainly that takes time and onboarding as well. And certainly, the capacity of staff in implementing the programs efficiently and effectively also just, take time. So we do recognize that there are competing factors. And so we are happy to take a look at what some of our programs that we've outlined and see if there is an ability to reshuffle. So I don't know if there's an ability to take it on concurrently, but it may be able to be kind of reorganized. So that something else gets deferred to a later time period.
Great. Yeah, I hope that there's a way to move that up, because 3 years, as I said, is a long time. We already see the displacement that has happened in the last 3 years. And actually the last year and few months, we can, definitely see the displacement. So if there's any way to prevent it from going too much further, that would be great. And I just have to say, this is a plug for that shared person in San Mateo County, right? That's being paid amongst the 21 element cities to look at programs like this and implement. But I just thought I'd plug that because I think that's a fabulous idea. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tate. And I somewhat second or third Vice Chair Harris's commentary on a master timeline would be wonderful. Just to be able to see what actual priorities are. And I know that HCD called out renter protections as an anti-displacement strategy that affirmatively furthers fair housing. So that feels like a place that we could start working because it is so important to housing element work. Okay, you guys, we've been doing this for 3.5 hours. But I think, unless there are other comments from commissioners, those are the things that we were supposed to meet and discuss tonight. Yes?
Yes.
Dan, I'm seeing you nod.
Yes, no, I think you got the thumbs up from Jeff. Yes, so we certainly appreciate the time of the Housing Commission and Planning Commission to meet for this special meeting on this important topic. We know we just released the document. It's as I think many people noted, it's a 700-page document, and so a lot to get through. We didn't intend this to be the end all for conversation and comment. This is just a beginning of sort of saying, this is our launch party, to get the word out, to get feedback early on in this process. I think in the slide presentation earlier today, there was mention about like how to provide written comments. So we will be, again, just a reminder, taking public comment during this 30-day period through June 10th. There is written comments that can be submitted via a web online form. We will also be having another study session with the City Council in a couple of weeks. We are targeting them May 31st. It's not certain yet, but that's an anticipated date. So there will be another opportunity to provide public comment, public verbal comment with the City Council. But again, we thank you this evening for your time and feedback, and we value our members of the public who have stayed here with us this evening as well and provided their public comment. So I think we're concluding it unless there's any other comments that any of the commissioners would like to make.
Or any additional staff? No? Okay. Well then, as there's no action being taken for the evening, I will adjourn the meeting at 10:43 p.m. with very many thanks to all of you for staying this long with us to talk about nitty-gritty details of a 700-page document. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.